開けるんだ開くのさその不思議な扉を登れるんだ登るのさ未来に触れるその心炸裂の富の節消えてゆく皆の命愛してる女性に裏切られ白涙が宇宙にさまよその行方さえも知らぬただただ自由に漂う登れるな登るのさ未来に触れるその心今私の富のさ熱く燃える富のさ正義の証富のさ敵を落とせ富のさ我らの富のさ
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman.
And Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to peer into the delightfully deranged mind of Tomino Yoshiyuki with our Tomino-THON. This week on the show, we leave the existential horror of the Ideon behind, and we embrace a brighter, a wackier world. The world of Zola, the world of combat mecha Xabungle. That's right, we are here to talk about what I think is one of the most under-discussed Tomino shows, certainly within the Western anime fan base, because I ain't never seen anyone talk about Xabungle. So I went into this show with no preconceived notions, and I absolutely love it. I think the show is phenomenal. Today we're only talking about the first half, so we're doing 2 episodes on Xabungle, because I don't know about you, Jonathan, but I still have nightmares about the 4.5-hour recording of the Turn A Gundam podcast back in the day. And so we are splitting our 50-episode shows as best we can. So today we're just talking about episodes 1 to 26 of Combat Mecha Xabungle. That's what we're discussing. It's also the only thing we've watched. So if there's any insane twist where Jiron is really, I don't know, Satan or something at the back half of the show, we don't know if that's coming. But we're talking about just that first half, and then next week we will discuss the second half of the show and the compilation movie Grafitti. But yes, today we're all things episodes 1 to 26 Xabungle. And what a fucking show this is, Jonathan.
Well, you always open these, Sean, by saying the delightfully deranged mind of Tomino Yoshiyuki. This show is less deranged than Ideon, but it is more delightful. This is on the delightful camp of Tomino, because this is his, other than, I guess, Daitarn, this is his first proper, comedic show. And unlike Daitarn, it is a fully serialized show. So this is, what's fascinating about Xabungle is that it is 100% a Tomino show. It is very clearly him in how it is told, how the world is built, how characters develop. The dialogue is super Tomino. But it is also a comedy. It's a comedy where characters don't die that much. You know, you have people jumping out of the mecha before Jiron smashes them, so he doesn't have to go cry in his room on the ship about all the people he's killed. But it still has all of the things that I think, signify Tomino to us. And that is such a cool combination. This show is such a clear precursor to Gundam Double Zeta, which is the Gundam series he does that is the most similar to this. And all in all, it's a fucking delight. It is also the only mecha show I've seen that you could properly call a Western. It is... There's shows like Trigun and stuff out there, but those aren't really mecha anime. This is a proper, giant robots battling anime, but in the Old West with a villain who looks like Clint Eastwood. It's great. It rocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's one of the fun things about this kind of first half of the Tomino-THON is seeing all these pieces in order of Tomino building up his style. And I think it is one of the cool things about this show. We commented last week with Ideon, or the last 2 weeks with both of our Ideon episodes, of that kind of the really weird places that non-Gundam Tomino can go. And how Rekkingista and G kind of bring some of that weirdness back into the Gundam mainline. And this is yet another kind of thread of Tomino where Double Zeta is definitely a reference point. I know when we get to Overman King Gainer, there's a lot of DNA shared between those two shows. And I think you also see echoes of it in some of like the kind of lighter-hearted elements of shows like Turn A Gundam and G-Reco as well. The kind of more comic version, the kind of wackier version of Tomino that really, I kind of expected to see more of in Daitarn 3, and it's not so much in that show. Like Daitarn 3 feels more like it's that kind of forge where he kind of like got his show running chops kind of like honed down by making a much more formulaic TV show. And here it is that just sense of like Gundam is such an explosion of his creativity that I was kind of thinking when we were coming into it that maybe Xabungle would be kind of a backward step or something that would resemble a little bit more like his pre-Gundam shows, just on the vague notions of what I had heard about it. Or, the fact that in my museum book, it is in a section that is paired with its Daitarn 3, this, and then Overman King Gainer in that book kind of puts those three things together. But I was really, delightfully surprised to find this show be, as you say, just as Tomino as anything else. And it really just feels like him making Gundam opened such a door for him creatively that even when he goes to a tonal space that is much more like Daitarn 3, the fundamental nature of the show is not like Daitarn 3. It is a singularly Tomino TV show still, and that's very, very cool.
Absolutely. This is also like the kind of show, and I mean this 100% as a compliment, that I wish I had seen as a kid. Like, can you imagine how fucking awesome this would have been as a child watching this week to week and getting to follow this story? It's because it's got the energy of like a good Disney afternoon show, like a DuckTales or a Tailspin, but with that serialized Tomino component where the world building and the storytelling and the character continuity is pulled through everything. And just, man, I feel the kids in Japan in 1982 who got to watch this were very lucky.
Yes, and while the show is fairly obscure over here, it is not in Japan, right? No. Like amongst Tomino fans and Mecha fans, it is a very, very well-liked show. That's the only place I've ever heard it, is in watching some Japanese YouTube channels. People occasionally mention a Xabungle reference. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I never see anyone discuss this in the English language fan base, compared to stuff like Ideon, compared to stuff like Overman King Gainer. Even Brain Powered is much more heavily discussed over here than this show is. And so it is fun to kind of watch and be like, oh, it's kind of like Double Zeta. The Western English anime fan base is really missing out by kind of ignoring and skipping over the show when you go through the kind of major works of Tomino. I feel like this one is just one that people don't hit in the same way that people who watch the old Gundam stuff sometimes just skip Double Zeta, because in the West it has a kind of reputation saddled with it. And these shows should have a much better reputation because they are as good as the other stuff that Tomino makes.
Totally. And it's part of just Western fandom has this real aversion to any kind of genre hybridity. Like, they really don't like it when their serious robot anime suddenly has jokes in it. And, that's a stupid opinion. You should be able to hold those things together, especially because Xabungle is a show that's very confident in its tone. Like, it's not, awkwardly having fourth wall breaks and stuff. It's all part of the, tapestry of the show. And just something, Westerners need to be more comfortable with.
Yes, but I was just had a lot of fun watching this and just kind of discovering what it was, because it is one of the only mysteries in the Tomino filmography I had, especially now that I've played 100-something hours of Super Robot Wars Y, and I'm very familiar with a lot of the main characters of Ore Battler Dunbine and Heavy Metal Elgime, even though I haven't watched those shows yet, but this show was a complete mystery to me. And so, and the back half is still a mystery. I'm very excited to do this podcast recording so I can finally watch more Combat Mecha Xabungle, because I haven't actually watched any of this show in 3 weeks, because I maybe got pretty far ahead of the curve of our recording schedule.
Indeed. And I'm excited to watch more as well. So, Sean, I was our point person on the notes for this week, so yes. Do you want me to take it away on that?
Yes, Jonathan. What's our history for Combat Mecha Xabungle?
All right, and I will just say I am recording this with a little bit of a cold, so if I sound a little weird as I'm going through all this, I do apologize. I am here with my throat coat tea, which I learned is an actual brand name of tea, the only tea brand name you really shouldn't Google at work, but it will hopefully help me to get through this podcast. All right, so for every show we've covered up to now, Tomino and Company came in as something of an underdog. None of the series that we've discussed so far were major successes. Some of them were like minor successes. They did fine. Daitarn had its success in Italy, and it was well-liked in Japan and all of that. But none managed to reach that elusive target of a full-year, 4-core, 50-episode run. And this is the episode where that all changes, because by the time Xabungle premieres, the first 2 Gundam movies have already hit theaters, Gunpla is on the market, Sunrise has started independently producing other non-Tomino shows, which it hadn't been before, and as Xabungle airs over the course of 82, the 3rd Gundam movie will become a really, really massive hit that sets records for the franchise that would not be beat until the current decade, the 2020s, and the Ideon films also come out to very solid reception. So 1982, which is where Xabungle airs, is a really big year for Tomino and Sunrise. And Xabungle not only goes the distance, it runs a full 50 episodes, but it inaugurates one of the most astonishing runs in anime history, because it kicks off 5 back-to-back year-long anime directed by Tomino. Xabungle, which airs February 82 to January 83, Ara Battler Dunbine, 49 episodes from February 83 to January 84, Heavy Metal Elgaim, 54 episodes from February 84 to February 85. Then Zeta Gundam, 50 episodes from March 85 to February 86. And Gundam Double Zeta, 47 episodes from March 86 to January 87. And then Char's Counterattack, the movie, premieres 1 year later on March 12th, 88, at which point Tomino finally eases off the gas. Gundam F91 is 3 years after that, Victory Gundam is 2 years later, and then there are fewer works and longer gaps afterwards. But that means that between February 6th, 1982, and January 31st, 1987, there is an episode of an anime, directed by Tomino Yoshiyuki, airing every single week in Japan for an astonishing 250 weeks/episodes. This is a historic period that we are talking about for the next bit on Japanimation Station here.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is just that you look at that run and it's just like, it makes sense that eventually he goes, you know what? I gotta stop a little bit. And then eventually he's like, and I gotta make Victory Gundam. I gotta work some fucking shit out before I start doing more anime. Because it is crazy. And it's something I think as we will go through some of the history and talk about Xabungle, I think one of the things that's very cool about this show is that it is a really pivotal show in the history of mecha anime in particular, because this show kind of feels like it is the dawn of what we think of as 80s mecha anime, and maybe kind of like 80s anime in general when you think about its positioning as this is the show that comes out for Sunrise, that's directed by Tomino, that is after this kind of declaration of the new genesis of anime and all this kind of stuff. This kind of like new era. This is when it really starts hitting, and Xabungle is like such a kind of unlikely trendsetter. And we'll hit later in the notes that there are a bunch of things this show starts doing that really kind of sets the tone for so much of not just Tomino shows in this period, but other mecha series like Vodums and Macross, etc. as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels very modern, I think is one way to say it. Like there's a lot of stuff in Ideon we looked at where I'm like, oh, I can see how this is a bridge between Gundam and Zeta Gundam. And there's just as much of that in Xabungle, even though obviously Zeta Gundam is different tonally. But like there's a lot of things this show does that feels like we're firmly in the 80s, whereas Ideon is, and this isn't to put it down of the show or anything, this is just a description, it is very much a 70s anime made in 1980, yes. Right? But this is an 80s show. So, while Sunrise's first few fully independent shows were all Tomino shows, Zambot, Daitarn, and Gundam, by the time the 1980s rolled around, the studio had grown enough to take on other independent productions too. What I mean by independent is that they had long been co-producing series with other studios or doing outsourcing work, some of that gross uke model that we talked about before, but from 1980 on, they stopped doing that altogether, and so that began with 1980's Invincible Robo Trider G7 and 1981's Strong Strongest Robo Daioja, both directed by Sasaki Katsutoshi, and then 1981's Dogram, Fang of the Sun, which was directed by Takahashi Ryosuke and Kanda Takayuki. And Daioja and Dogram both benefited from the Gundam boom that began early in 1981, and from the advent of Gunpla, which of course is a strategy that was adapted to those shows as well, and saw continued success in that plastic model market. So the next planned series in this non-Tomino Sunrise lineage was a project titled The Exploiter, spearheaded by writer Suzuki Yoshitake and director Yoshikawa Soji, both of whom we've discussed before on Japanimation Station. Suzuki and Yoshikawa both started at Mushi Pro in the Astro Boy days like Tomino had, and they are two of the people who split off from Mushi Pro to found the company Art Fresh alongside Sugi Gizaburo and Dezaki Osamu. You can see our Dororo 1969 episode for more details on that. Suzuki, in fact, was one of the main figures that led Dororo after Sugi left. We remember that had a directorial shift halfway through, and he also wrote the lyrics to Dororo's song, which, since I have shown Dororo the show to some of my students, they will still come up and say to me, Hogatara, 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 Pon. So that has infected some of the students at CU Boulder too, which I'm very happy about.
Perfect.
So thank you, Mr. Suzuki. He later joined Sunrise in 1972 when Sunrise is still Shoeisha, and he became a very prolific writer there. We saw him previously as sharing that original story credit with Tomino on Zambot 3, where he also headed the writing team, and he'd also go on to be series composer for Mobile Fighter G Gundam under one of his pseudonyms. Yoshikawa, meanwhile, has just this amazing career we keep running into. After leaving Art Fresh, he ran with the sort of Miyazaki, Takahata, Otsuka Yasuo crew over at Tokyo Movie and A Productions, where he worked on Lupin III Part 1, and he was one of the main writers on Miyazaki's Future Boy Conan, a show that is ironically a stated influence on Xabungle, though not on the exploiter version of the show that Yoshikawa himself was working on. Yoshikawa's greatest claim to fame is probably as director of the first Lupin III movie, The Mystery of Mamo, which is a stone-cold fucking classic, and at Sunrise he would go on to be one of the main writers behind Armored Trooper Bottoms, the next series from Dogram director Takahashi Ryosuke. His last major directorial role was as series director on Kirby, Right Back At Ya, in 2001. That's the English title of the show. It's just Hoshi no Kabi in Japan. And that is a show that has an amazing amount of pedigree among its staff, and which we probably need to cover one day, because that show is fucking crazy. I see that clip of Kirby with the gun every few weeks on YouTube, and it always brings me delight.
Maybe we can just make Kirby Right Back At You its own season of Japanimation Station. We just do an episode for each episode of the show and just do the most thorough, fine-tooth comb season of this podcast ever.
That's a show ran 100 episodes, so that would be a lot.
There we go.
All right.
Two years of this podcast.
So The Exploiter was planned to be a serious real robot anime, and a large amount of prep work was done under Suzuki and Yoshikawa. According to Suzuki, this version was set on a space colony and would be set in the aftermath of an attack that caused most of the inhabitants to flee, other than a group of outcasts who remained behind, and that would create this sort of Wild West scenario, but with robots, as these outcasts battled each other on this abandoned colony. It kind of reminds me of like the concept of the Texas colony in Gundam, if it was like still populated by some weirdos, which is a cool idea for a show. And you can see the line between that and Xabungle, although Xabungle changes that from like a satellite with kind of an Earth connection to just a pure, we're on a different planet, these aren't humans, whatever it is. Different reasons have been given for why Yoshikawa, the director, left this project, but Suzuki has said that Yoshikawa wasn't particularly comfortable with mecha stories at this point, and the discussions between them about the direction of the show just didn't go well. But in any case, Yoshikawa steps down, and with Xabungle set to premiere in February 1982, this proposal, not called Xabungle yet, but you know what I mean, the show that would be Xabungle, that is brought to Tomino in September of 1981, with the request that he step in as director a scant 4 to 5 months before broadcast is set to begin. To put this all in the timeline for us, and I had to go back to the timeline notes I made for Gundam because this is so complicated. September of 81 would be just after the premiere of the second Gundam movie, Soldiers of Sorrow, in July 81, and months before the March 1982 debut of Gundam Movie 3, Encounters in Space, and almost a year before the two Ideon movies in July 82. So while Tomino isn't directing a TV show at this moment in time, his plate is plenty full. He has 3 movies in the pipeline in September of 81, which is crazy. So When this was like taken to him and he's deciding whether to take on the project, Tomino took the production materials created, like early designs for the Xabungle, the iron gear, and the overall Old West approach. He went to a hotel, and in a single night, he crafted the basic setting and concept for the show. And from there, we were off to the races. Upon learning Tomino was taking over, Yoshikawa stated, "I also was shocked. I knew he was so busy with the Gundam and Ideon movies that I couldn't possibly have predicted that it would fall in his lap," which I love. So, Sean, you translated for us a memo from the museum book called Xabungle no Tamashi, or The Soul of Xabungle, which would also have been a great name for this show.
Yes.
This was written in 1982 as part of Tomino brainstorming and reflecting on the production he had suddenly been thrust into. This memo is fucking amazing, and I'm going to let you go ahead and read it, Sean.
Okay, yes. So again, this is him reflecting on it at the time. So I want to stress that this is like shortly after this meeting that he's writing this memo and reflecting on it. So he said, "I was pretty depressed about the irony that this project fell into my lap now when I had only a night, no half a night, to get started. Narrowing down the setting for Robot Show down to the essential point that it's a place where the robots could function/move, I thought about it for about 3 hours. However, I couldn't find any hints in the materials they gave me. At that point, I was overwhelmed with a sense of crisis. Tried to take a bath, tried doing some stretches, but even by midnight, I hadn't come up with anything other than the robots operating by gasoline." I want to pause there. I love that he throws that out as this like offhand, like, yeah, I had just come up with the idea that the robots run by gasoline, as if that's not fucking one of the coolest ideas in this whole show.
Yes.
But he just kind of offhandedly mentions it in this memo. Anyways, he continues, "But that's just what ideas are like. Yatate Hajime said we had to make it like an Old West movie. And I want to make it clear, he does refer to the Sunrise Upper Branch as that pseudonym Yatate Hajime, which is I also love. He just refers to them like it's a person.
That is low-key so passive-aggressive, and I love it.
Yeah, so Yatate Hajime said we had to make it like an Old West movie. I thought about that and was considering staying at the hotel for one more night when a thought suddenly occurred to me. If we're talking Old West, then we're talking about a wasteland. If we're talking about a wasteland, then why not just make the Earth one big wasteland? Then, if the whole world is going to be a wasteland, I thought about how that could happen. But I realized that even in science fiction, that isn't really possible. But whatever, okay, we're just for the sake of it saying the entire planet was basically destroyed, and then we can make a story out of how the people lived and how they were going to continue to live as the world recovered. At that point, it took me about 2 hours to put together the basic world and setting. If there aren't a lot of people, let's just use oil. If the whole surface is dried out, then you could drill deep for oil, and if this is after an event which blasted the surface, it must be after some calamity. People would not be able to live honestly like they had before. It would have to be an era for a new kind of humanity, etc., etc. So we won't use any kind of advanced energy system. But we've got to give advanced computer systems for the civilians for their two-legged mecha. But if they don't have the knowledge or understanding of mechanics, then they would just be using whatever is forced on them. For example, it would be like a world filled with people who know nothing about electronics trying to repair a radio. But why them? Because if you're going to rebuild the environment of a destroyed planet, you would need to choose resilient people like them. If so, use the principle of survival of the fittest and let civilian survivors fight each other. To that end, have them fight over territory by making them dig up and sell something totally worthless like bluestone and slowly teaching them how an economy functions. So given all that, why two-legged mecha? Yes, the weakened remnants of humanity, the innocent, gave these mecha to the civilians. It was in that order that I built up the setting, so the only things remaining were the characters and story. Once I've made a few main characters, then all I need is to make the story. Once all that ended, it was about 3 or 4 in the morning, I think. I'm glad I was alone. Once you satisfied your professional and personal sense of self, you can have a really good night's sleep.
This should be a one-act play. Or a one-man play. This should be like a one-man on a stage and just a sparse hotel, Japanese hotel like set that you could have. And this is just all Tomino over one night coming up with the ideas of Xabungle. That would be absolutely riveting to me. I love this. I mean, one of the best things about Xabungle is its setting. It is such a cool idea for a show. It has just as much sort of like richness in its lore and world building as anything else Tomino has done. But it does have this, like, I love how he walks you through the progression of his logic, because it really does come all back to that, like, main setting and everything that grows from that. And it just speaks to why you use the term delightfully deranged, Sean, because that is a delightfully deranged anecdote.
Yeah, and it does like shed a lot of clarity onto his creative process. I think we kind of can glean from the nature of a lot of the production materials anyways, that he is someone who's so focused at the onset in the setting. Like if you look at, we talked about it with Gundam, that those original Gundam production materials or Gunboy production materials are all about the fucking space colonies and the political stratification of these societies and the conflict between Earth and space. It's all that. And then he's like, I don't know, there's some dude who's at some point going to say, this is no Zaku boy or whatever. You know, it's like he's got a couple pieces of dialogue he came up with and some wacky names for characters. And it is like, it's just interesting because I feel like usually when we hear about like the creative process from creators, usually it's either, I feel like people start with, I have kind of an idea for like the theme and the overall kind of like story hook, or I have an idea for a character or a set of characters. And that's usually, I feel like, the genesis point that creatives talk about as a thing that builds up the larger show. And for Tomino, it's clearly all the setting. It's like, what is the central hook for what is this world? And then how do I build everything from there? And then the characters and stories are things that naturally emerge from the nature of the world that he builds. And I think we will continue to see this very distinctively because, like, I know that Or Battler Dunbine, the setting of Beistenwell is a whole different type of setting. Pentagona World and Heavy Metal Elgheim is a whole other place. And he's like really thinking through like, the setting is the defining genesis of whatever the thing is, and then the characters in plot are things that naturally follow from that point.
And I think that's what I know attracts you and me to his storytelling so much, is like there is this holistic sense to the story of everything is a part of it. Like Shar Aznable in Gundam is not just a great character on his own, it's because he arises out of that setting. He is this like Hamlet-esque figure who comes out of this political dispute in space, right? And Amuro is a particular kind of, young boy audience insert who comes out of this setting that they've created. And that's true of all of his shows. We saw that a lot with Ideon, we see that a lot here, and it is so much part of the fun.
Yeah, and when I found that memo in the museum book, I was so delighted. I was like, this is like one of the fucking best things I've seen in researching it for any podcast. Like, it's just so wild. Because one, it's you get that insight into the creative process. The other thing is just the mental image of Tomino just like sort of storming around a hotel room, this like overwhelmed with a sense of crisis. He's like taking a bath. It's like, this fucking work. I'm doing calisthenics. It's like, fuck, I got nothing other than gasoline. I don't know. Fuck it. And then he just all of a sudden unspools this whole crazy, almost like it's the scientific like method or something, this like logical chain of processes that starts from the gem of their robots that use gasoline and then ends up with, here is an entire TV show. It's fucking crazy.
It also speaks to how his shows are, and this is something I'm going to compare to a show I'm going to mention in a minute, that I think Tomino has a one-up on, is that this is also part of how his shows are able to maintain that episodic serialized balance, is that when you're making 50 fucking episodes of something, not every episode is going to be able to progress the plot in an equal dimension, right? Or nor should it, right? And so when you have a rich setting, though, you can always fall back on that. You can always fall back on that as a plot for a one-off episode or a little arc or something like that. And we've seen that in Gundam. You see that in Ideon. You see that here. And I think that is part of the strength of his entire style, is that if that foundation is there, you actually do have a lot of wiggle room in building a long, serialized narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right, so given the other projects Tomino was working on at the time, and the number of dark, realistic shows Sunrise had created so far this decade, it is perhaps unsurprising that a more comedic, madcap approach was adopted for Xabungle. Tomino was specifically conscious of the Kill 'Em All Tomino moniker that he had already earned by now, and which he would prove with a vengeance in the Ideon movie that debuted midway through Xabungle's run. With his endless bloodlust satiated there, Xabungle was specifically conceived of as a nobody dies show. Now, while that is not entirely true to the events of the narrative, there are supporting characters who die. Xabungle does take, great pains to avoid showing death or graphic violence. Unlike Tomino's other protagonists, Jiron is not shown to be killing his enemies, since they typically leap out of their mechas as he attacks, and the show in general has a much more comedic, lighthearted touch, undercutting character archetypes, so you have stuff like Timp Sharon being a badass, but also being goofy and clumsy, and even sometimes breaking the fourth wall, like when Kid Horla returns to the show, he declares, "I will be the main character starting now," and stuff like that. And I love this combination. I think once in a while the nobody dies thing causes some confusion. There are definitely some points in the show where a character is meant to have died, and I was like writing in my notes, I'm like, are they dead? And I'd have to wait until someone said it because they visually don't show anything, which is different for Tomino, who's generally pretty graphic about this. But other than that, I love the tone. I love the commitment to the bit of people jumping out of mechs as they explode. Mm-hmm. It's very, original Dragon Ball Z dub. I can see their parachutes, and I love it. It's delightful.
Yeah. Although, but it's, I think the thing that it does really well is it's not as ridiculous as we're grafting it on after the fact. Like, oh, look, I see the parachutes off in the distance. Trust me, we're just not going to cut to it. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Because there is something I love about Jiron's just like, I'm gonna fucking stick this giant fucking machine gun in your face, yell at you on the radio, get the fuck out of that thing or I'm gonna fucking kill you. I'm gonna blow that shit to smithereens. And people just desperately scrambling to get out of it. There's like Tomino leans into that and the righteous fury of Jiron Amos is like, fucking, you guys got 3 seconds and then this shit is going down. Yes. And it works really well. I think it's it maintains the tone of it would feel wrong for these characters to just be brutally murdering every random person they come across because It's not like a true war, it's this kind of these weird skirmishes around resources and stuff like that would feel excessive and in the setting of the world would feel like it would come back on you if you are going around and just indiscriminately killing people. It would be very counterproductive. So I think he builds in the setting a motivation for why we're not killing people, but that doesn't hamper the sort of frenetic and intense nature of the action because you still get these moments of him just grabbing a mech and lifting it over his head. It's like, you guys better fucking get out of this thing, and then jumping ship and him ripping it in half. It fucking rules.
It fucking rules, and I just love the show's entire sense of humor. There's so much good physical comedy in this. The way they personify the robots much more than in his other shows, where the Xabungle will move like a person. It will be clumsy. Jiron, he'll do the sort of Amuro thing of chucking his gun and punching and stuff, but he does it much more like a clumsy kid, fighting on the playground, which is the energy of a lot of this show, which I love. Mm-hmm. And it's just delightful. Even when they do their silly fourth wall breaks, those always catch me off guard and make me laugh because they don't overdo it. And when they do it, I think it's generally fairly clever.
Yeah, and you do have moments that are fantastic, in the late sections of the show. I don't exactly remember the entire context, but I think it's in the last arc where one of the characters, I think it's the merchant kind of bad guy in the last arc of what we covered today, mentions man, I know that Xabungle is a show that kind of breaks tropes, but this is getting ridiculous. Which is just a fun because we'll get into there are all these classic mecha tropes that Xabungle is the thing that is the first show to break them, that then everything follows afterwards. That's part of this clear separation point. But it was wild to see the character of the show verbalize that they were very self-conscious of the fact that a lot of the elements of how Xabungle is built, how it uses its mechas, is so against these sort of standard genre conventions. Not in this kind of told deconstruction way necessarily like a Gundam is, but just in this we're just going to go in a very different direction and do something different and think about these things in a different way. And it was funny to have a show, the character literally comment on it.
That's fun. And when it does play by tropes, one of my favorite lines, I think this is either Chill or Blue May who says this at one point in one of the episodes of no, we're going to need the main mech now. Of the Xabungle's got to come out. It's time for the main mech. And it's stuff like that that's very, very funny. All right, another element in this tonal shift, and this is a fun conversation here, might be the stated influence of Miyazaki Hayao, and particularly the show Future Boy Conan from 1978, which Suzuki had written on and Tomino had done 2 episodes of storyboards for. We discussed this back in our season premiere because Tomino was and he talked about this in interviews, is totally in awe of Miyazaki and Conan, which sparked this lifelong, although fairly one-sided rivalry of Tomino feeling competitive with Miyazaki or pretending to be in his sort of pseudo-crotchety interview style. I don't think Miyazaki commented on this back all that much from what I've seen, but Miyazaki doesn't talk in that same way the way Tomino does. And again, this anecdote that I've shared before is just too fucking good not to share again. When the producer at Studio Ghibli, Suzuki Toshio, visited Tomino after the release of Nausicaa in 1984, he apparently arrived to find Tomino watching reruns of Conan. "I'm studying," Tomino explained. "Miyazaki is really good. I've watched it many times. but it's my works that are hits. Miyazaki makes the good ones, and I make the hits. And I fucking love that moment, because it is in 1984, that was still true. It's soon to not be true necessarily, but at that point it was still true, and I love the both admiration and braggadocio to that. It's great.
Yes, it is. Yes, Tomino is just the funniest man in the world.
Yes.
Basically, yeah.
And I love that also because that's not a Tomino anecdote. That's Suzuki Toshio remembering it, which means Tomino does just act like this sometimes, which is great. But Xabungle is the show for which Tomino has stated the most direct influence of Conan, which does make sense. Tomino apparently instructed his animators to imitate Castle of Cagliostro on this series, and there is a very similar style of character animation and physics at play here to Miyazaki stuff, Conan or Lupin, particularly if you look at stuff like the way Jiron will scramble in and out of the Xabungle. Like, one of my favorite details in the show, that there is absolutely no way to get in that thing, apparently, other than climbing to the top and getting in the head, which is ridiculous, but it creates all this great visual comedy. There's just a very clear DNA to how Miyazaki portrayed characters like Conan and Lupin, and even like some of his other like young boy characters like Pazu. That's later on, but you'll see that kind of like those furious physical exertions. And definitely, if you've seen Future Boy Conan, you can see the like influence here, the way it is this like post-apocalyptic journey, but with this group of kind of, they're literal kids in Conan, they're childish in Xabungle, and I think you can see that DNA, but I also think how you can see that Tomino is more naturally suited to this kind of thing, because I love Future Boy Conan. It's a really interesting show. It's one of the best animated TV shows of all time, but like, I also think Miyazaki is someone who was more comfortable with TV when he was making like one-off episodes. And I think his natural inclinations as a storyteller are for like 2-hour films. And Conan is this 26-episode aggressively serialized show that has no episodic like nature to it at all. And so particularly in the first half of Conan, there can be some like pacing issues. Whereas Tomino has this down pat at this point of like how to balance the episodic and the serialized. So you get some of those, you can see the influence, but I also think Xabungle is better at a lot of those sorts of like narrative world building things than Miyazaki was in this kind of setting. And it's kind of a fun comparison there, because this is tonally one of the closer things that these two have made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, you can definitely see that sort of like style of like the comic, like extreme physical action, you know, like you have that running joke with Temp where he's trying to act very cool and then he starts to walk away, but he's on like the top of a hill and he's trying to stumble.
Yes.
And then he's like running down the hill and desperately trying to fall on his ass, which is very similar to a couple of scenes in Castle of Cagliostro. Obviously nowhere near the same level of detail in animation, but it's going for the same kind of physical comedy. And just the, like, how outward the characters are, how extreme they are with their physical actions, and how, like, animated they are, not, like, in the sense of they are, like, literally characters in an animated TV show, but they're very animated that they're acting all the time and they are, like, projecting their bodies all the time, which is a very Miyazaki-like thing. But I think you definitely see here also Tomino getting very good at, it merges so much with his pre-existing style of really intense like action, like big emotions, the pace of his dialogue, the way he cuts in combat scenes, which, you know, Xabungle, you know, is just as good as any of his shows in terms of the action and the way that communicates energy. And I think like the merging of that ends up having that like character animation style ends up having a fairly different ultimate affect, I think, than Miyazaki, even if you can see the clearer inspiration there.
Yeah, which is why I mentioned this, because it is fun. Yes. And I like how you can, it's one of those cases where when you have one heavily individual auteur influence another heavily individual auteur, what comes out the other side isn't like an easy one-to-one comparison, but this like complicated array of influences that makes something very special and unique like Xabungle, and I love that about it. Despite the change in tone and style and his last-minute joining of the project, Tomino was no less involved in Xabungle than he'd been on Gundam or Ideon. He threw himself into the work on this series much like those, and it's well known that he again rewrote most of the dialogue to fit his own voice. Again, you can just tell watching it, but also people have said this. While he only has 5 storyboard credits across the 50 episodes, it's also known that he contributed many, many more storyboards than that, and possibly like as much or more than for like Gundam or Ideon, because he's said that he felt the storyboards for this series were more difficult than on more serious, story-focused shows like Gundam, and that because of the comic timing and amount of on-screen motion, all that stuff we were just talking about, he wound up doing more sort of micromanaging through the storyboards than ever before, even specifying in between frames within the storyboards themselves, which is a very rare thing to do. For this reason, he said, the animators hated me. In fact, Tomino has talked a lot about this production and is fairly self-critical about it, as he generally is. His attention was most divided to other projects during the first core, and as a result, he felt those episodes lacked the sense of speed and movement he wanted the show to convey. He also felt that the animators at the Sunrise division that animated Xabungle, which is Sunrise Studio 2, were a little too set in their ways from working on shows like Voltes V, I don't know if I'm saying Voltes 5, the Combiner robot anime, and that he remained unsatisfied with their work even after the first two core, and for that reason he actively intervened and micromanaged the animation, telling them, the way you remember animation is all a lie, which should be a bumper sticker, or a tattoo. The Tomino should have that like on his forearm or something. The production was tense, and he said, I wondered how many animators will quit, and how many directors will run away, but he also felt that he and the staff started getting along and communicating better during the third core, and that everything felt on track by the end. And, I mean, you and I cannot speak to the third and fourth core yet, because we will talk about that in the next episode. I will say I do think you see some of what he's talking about over these first two cores, like the second half of these episodes, so like 13 to 26, that momentum and speed, it keeps ratcheting up. Like what's there you see it in the first half, but then it just gets kind of bigger and bigger and more skillful at what it's doing. And you can definitely feel like the show's style start to coalesce over the course of these 26 episodes.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Although, I still think that those, obviously, the 1 to 13 are still fantastic. But you see that kind of it kind of growing into its own style, which honestly, that is like for Gundam and Ideon. There are obviously very similar comments we talked about with the other people working with him on those shows. Of that, it's like I forget who it was, but the guy had the quote about the new type stuff for Gundam, and him being like, I wish he had if he knew what it was, I wish he had told us all that at the beginning, because by the time we got to the end and everyone else had figured it out, the show was almost over. It is kind of the same thing with like the Ide and Ideon, but I think the sense of like, that Tomino has to really micromanage people for the first half of the show in particular, until everyone kind of fully gets on board with whatever that kind of thing is that the show is getting, because his vision is so specific, it's so detailed. It's pretty interesting. But I also see why he would have to be so particular with the storyboards, because this show is stylistically, in terms of how it does that animation stuff, so different than other Sunrise shows and shows that he had done before. Because even though you've got like, the Iron Gear, which is your white base equivalent, you've got, your mecha and stuff like that, the characters are so much more animated in those positions. Like Captain Bright gets to just sit in his chair and go, fire the main cannon, and just like, extend his hand out and point, or whatever. And, the same thing with Bess in Ideon. He's just like leaning on the front console, shouting shit into the microphone. And so you don't have to do a lot to animate those actions. And also with, your pilots in like Amuro in the Gundam or Cosmo in the Ideon, most of it is them just sitting in the chair and they'll push a lever back and forth and then they're talking. So there's a lot of like the people are not all that animated in most of those episodes. It's the action, that's the robots. That's where they're really like spending all that animation cost. Whereas here, even when Elchi is up in the cockpit of the Iron Gear and is giving orders, she's like leaping out the front window and grabbing the microphone and shouting into it and almost falling off. And Fat Man has to stop her and pull her back in and all that kind of stuff. And Jiron, he's flying out of the front of the Xabungle, having to scramble back in, and then he's got a whole fucking car wheel that he's like yanking back and forth. Just that the nature of the action for the people is so extreme that even in those places where typically for these mecha shows they get to really cut back on the animation cost and just get to reuse a close up on the character's face and their mouth flaps move, you just don't have that all that much in Xabungle. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that he is like, these people are going to fucking hate me, but for this show to be the thing that I picture in my head, fuck it. Like, here we go. Like, let's strap in, because it is such a different kind of show than anything he had made before in that sort of way.
Like, I think this is best seen in just the pure physical interaction the pilots have with the mecha, because for the most part, in a Gundam fight, Amuro is in the cockpit and the Gundam is fighting. And that's the relationship. But in Xabungle, like, they don't have seatbelts in that thing. Half the time he doesn't have the visor down, so every time there's a bump, he's getting flung out of the Xabungle, he's running back in, he's jumping all over the cockpit, and so, like, it's not just the Xabungle is out there being personified and running around and fighting. There's just as much focus on Jiron in the cockpit or out of it or around it or whatever, and you get that with everybody else too. Like anyone else fighting, Timp if he's in his mecha, if you've got, you know, Rag in the other Xabungle, Elchi takes out the other Xabungle, you get all of that, and yeah, it's there for everybody, and it is. I'm honestly very impressed that like Sunrise was able to do something like this well in a period where they're doing this many other things, because this is like stylistically a really heavy break from other stuff that particularly Tomino's done, but to my knowledge, even other Sunrise shows up to this point. So that is like one of the things that's most impressive and fun about this show.
Yeah, because all these animators have obviously like really heavily specialized at this point. If they've been working at Sunrise for several years, and we saw in like Ideon the huge benefit that show had, where you could feel that like, man, the people working on the show have been working on mecha shows for years at this point, and they've got the shit down. And like Ideon is such a gorgeous looking show in this very traditional kind of Sunrise style. And then Xabungle just does not look like that at all. And so it's like they all have to relearn how do you animate in order to work on the show.
Yeah, it's a great looking show. It's very fun. All right, a note on the title, because Xabungle has a similar, although less pronounced title discrepancy as Ideon, which we talked about last time in terms of between Japanese title, English title. For the most part in the English fandom, if you like search for Xabungle on Wikipedia or, you know, My Anime List or something like that, it's generally just referred to as Combat Mecha Xabungle, which is a simple and direct translation of the Japanese Sento Mecha Xabungle. Just very direct. But as with Ideon, being sometimes called Space Runaway Ideon, which is based on the words in the theme song, even though in Japanese it's titled Densetsu Kyojin Ideon. Is that right? Legendary giant Ideon. Xabungle is sometimes called Blue Gale Xabungle, and that comes from the theme song where the term Blue Gale is used to describe it. That is the title that High Dive, the streaming service, used when they streamed the show in 2017, which was the first official English release of this series. Again, if you're wondering why Xabungle doesn't have a presence over here, it hasn't even had an official release for a full decade at the time we're recording this. So, you know, it's not a show that had much of a presence. The standard definition Blu-ray release of the show by Made in Japan, which came out in 2018, that simply called the show Xabungle with no, like, other title on it. At least on the front cover. The description on the back cover calls it Blue Gale Xabungle. In any case, the show isn't as well known by this alternate title as Ideon is by Space Runaway. I also wanted to note that Made in Japan release has a promo tagline on the back cover, reading The Good, the Bad, and the Giant Robot, and I suggest this should have actually been the English title of the show. Particularly if you were going to do like the 2000s era Toonami English dub, that's what I would have called it, because you would have gotten to hear Peter Cullen say it on the ads, and that would have been very fun.
Yes. Jiron and his friends on the Iron Gear in The Good, the Bad, and the Giant Robot, only on Toonami.
If they ever revive Toonami again and Peter Cullen isn't around to do it, I think they should hire you, Sean. You do a very good impression.
I spent a lot of time as a kid trying to do the Toonami promo guy voice as I knew it back then.
Anyway, yeah, so just a small note on the title there. I do also like the title Blue Gale Xabungle. I think that's another, that could work in the same way Space Runaway does. But Combat Mecha Xabungle is how we will refer to it.
Yes.
All right, and then Sean, I'll let you handle this part here, because talking about this show's place in anime history, and maybe we can expand on this discussion next week as well, but this show does do a bunch of things that are like innovative, and you've done some research on this, or reported on someone else's research on this, I guess it would be more accurate to say.
Yes, I've reported on someone else's research of talking about this. it's a daisy chained piece there. So this is one of my notes I had from the Fujitsu Ryota book on Tomino Yoshiyuki, which we've brought up throughout the season as part of like kind of my research stuff on this. So he pulls in a list that this is from a different anime kind of academic, anime and tokusatsu researcher / academic, Hikawa Yusuke. And Hikawa has this breakdown of what he says is Tomino's impact on mecha anime of the 1980s through specifically the next three shows we're talking about, including Xabungle, Or Battle Dunbine, and Heavy Metal Elgime. And he creates this kind of 5-point list. And some of these are a little bit more pronounced, I think, when we get to Dunbine. But Xabungle is the thing that starts all these trends, some of them just in a slightly more minor way. So the first thing he points out that is a trend-setting thing that Xabungle does is creating new types of mecha that are unique to just that setting. So this is Walker Machines in Xabungle, Aura Battlers in Aura Battler Dunbine, and the Heavy Metals of Heavy Metal Elgheim. Like, the Aura Battlers and Heavy Metals are how the mechas are called, or I don't even know if you call them a mecha in Dunbine because they're pseudo-organic. But all three of these shows have these mechas whose mechanical concept and design is unique and complete to just that individual work and is married to the unique setting of that work. So Planet Zola of Xabungle, Bison Wall of Dunbine, Pentagona World of Heavy Metal Elgheim. And all of these served as a new stimulus to the plastic model market each year. But basically the idea that you create a very narrow concept, that it's not just generically this is a mech, it's like this is a specific kind of mech that only really makes sense in this setting, that has specific features that make sense to this setting, but it's also not a super robot show. You don't only have one, you don't have just like the Mazinger Z or whatever. It's kind of like Gundam in that you've got a whole range of these. But I think you can see the difference between the way that Gundam treats the mobile suits and this show treats the Walker Machines. That there is this conceptual narrowness to and that all the designs follow. And for the Walker Machines, it's obviously the notion of them running on gasoline, them having I have to keep on reminding myself that I want to call them a vintage car aesthetic, but it's not a vintage car aesthetic. It is a contemporary car aesthetic to the show. To us, it's vintage, but the leather seats and the leather, steering wheels and stuff like that. It's all of those concepts are very specific that you can't really have another show that does all those things, because it would just feel like you're ripping off Combat Mecha Xabungle. But if other shows have mechas that vaguely resemble mobile suits, I don't think you'd have the same sensibility, because the mobile suits are just generic enough in concept that kind of any mecha can kind of fit in that world. And I know that Aura Battlers and Heavy Metals have the same thing for their respective shows. So that's one point where you see this kind of different concept for what mechas are. That allows for that huge diversification, because this also extends to, I'm going to repeatedly refer to Vodums and Macross here because they're the two best known other 80s mecha shows that I've seen, but Armored Trooper Vodums and Macross obviously have the exact same thing. Macross has their fighter jets, which are super fucking specific to that setting. The Armored Troopers and Vodums also super specific and very clearly influenced by how Walker Machines are kind of overall designed. The second element is what he calls the elements of a new format for mecha anime. And so there are a lot of specific trends that Xabungle sets that these other shows do that becomes a huge thing that Gundam starts adopting as well. So this would include, you have a second upgraded mecha. So we hit this at the last episode we're going to talk about today, where you get the Walker Gallia, but the notion of halfway through the show, the main character loses their whatever the main machine is, or the thing that precedes the main machine, and then they get a second upgraded form. And of course this happens for Gundam. Zeta Gundam is the first show that does this, and then it becomes a very common thing, but it's also true in lots of other non-Tomino mecha shows. One thing that he doesn't mention here, but I will put in here because I think it fits into this category as well, is the notion that the machine is not special and unique. So there are two Xabungles, right? Which is fucking wild. You don't have that, right? There's not two Gundams, right? You don't have a notion that the main character's machine is just another mech that's just like all the other mech. It maybe is a little bit better, but it's not like the Gundam is a totally unique, it is the pinnacle of mobile suits. Nothing else touches it. It is the fucking mobile suit, right? And obviously for super robot shows, that's much more extreme of a distinction. Gundam starts to blur it a little bit, but in this show, the Xabungle is not a hugely remarkable mecha. It is more that Jiron is a really good pilot, and the Xabungle's good, but you pretty quickly get to mechas in the show that are better than the Xabungle is. As soon as Kid Horla comes back, he has got a better Walker Machine than the Xabungle. And so that is another thing that becomes very common where, Kiriko does not have a unique Armored Trooper and Armored Trooper Bottoms. He just has another scope dog. The main characters in Macross all just have Valkyries. They just have those fighter jets. They're not this is the ultimate fighter jet of all time and only the main character can pilot it. You're completely gone from that concept. And then the next one is...
One thing I'll say is that Gundam generally avoids that in the main shows, but that will be a thing in the OVAs. The OVAs will often do that for Gundam, where like all of the ones from the 90s, so 0080, 0083, and most notably probably 08MS team, will do that as well in a way that's clearly like also influenced by those other shows of the 1980s.
Yeah, and I would even say that while like Gundam doesn't go full on in this direction, that there aren't literally 2 Zeta Gundams, you do in like, you know, the Zeta Gundam in Zeta Gundam is not the best mobile suit in that setting. It's just like a good mobile suit for Camille. But like the Hyakishiki is just as good as the Zeta Gundam, and probably like the Cubile in the O and some of those mobile suits near the end, the Palace Athene, are probably better than the Zeta Gundam is. So even Gundam doesn't go so far as to have like, we've got mass-produced Zetas. You still have the sense of like, the main mobile suit for the main pilot is not inherently the like statistically best mecha in the show that is unique and stands above the rest. In the way that maybe the original Mobile Suit Gundam starts to get away from that a little bit at the end, with the Jeong with Char and stuff like that, which he, you know, doesn't have legs, but it doesn't need it. But you know, in Mobile Suit Gundam, I think you still very much have that retaining a little bit of that super robot sensibility of this is the fucking thing, and everybody else wishes they had a Gundam, but only one man can have the Gundam, and that's Amuro Ray.
And even in Zeta Gundam, Camille spends the first half of that show in a Gundam Mark II that is specifically in this setting a more common suit. So, yeah.
And then the last point here, and I thought this was an interesting one that it had just not occurred to me, that one other thing that Xabungle does with insert songs, but then Dunbine and Elgheim do for their opening ending themes, is to have a female vocalist. And it did not occur to me that that is not a thing that was a thing before now.
Right.
Certainly for the opening and ending themes, you all have the kind of crooning male vocals that we, you know and love of the 70s anime. You do have a couple of female insert songs, so you do have, like, Mobile Suit Gundam has an insert song when Lala dies that's sung by a female vocalist, but stylistically, that is sort of more stereotypically a kind of female vocal song, that it's very, like, slow and it's very, like, emotive, whereas when we'll talk about Hey You by Mio, which is the insert song on episode 25, which is the first one of these, like, that style is very clearly this kind of like 80s J-rock female vocalist style that Mio then becomes very famous for throughout the 80s and the 90s with, like, eventually she does, like, Men of Destiny, the opening theme for 083 Stardust Memory, for instance. But, like, that kind of sound you get for a lot of the opening themes and stuff like that for 80s mecha anime, where you have a lot more of that kind of female J-rock style, that this is where that starts happening, and everything else is still doing the crooning male vocals, like, and it takes a bit, because Macross still does that. Vodum's is not the full crooner style, but it's close to that. It gets a little bit more, you know, kind of bluesy in style and a little bit more gruff, but, like, I thought that was a really interesting point that it never would have occurred to me, but it is so true that the sound of the songs of 1970s Super Robot shows is really defined by this very particular kind of male vocalist, and that goes away in the 80s, and Xabungle is where that trend starts.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because you're right. When that insert song comes in episode 25, it sounds, again, modern in a way that feels like it's presaging stuff to come, rather than in a lineage of stuff we've already seen.
Yeah, and it's, pretty cool. Number 3 on this point is the work of Kogawa Tominori, the character designer, chief animation director of this show, Daitern 3 Ideon, and the shows to come, because he does that for Dunbine and Elgheim as well. And then his studio Bibo, that we talked about a lot last week, that they were the people that basically did the majority of the animation for the Ideon Be Invoked, that they created new paradigms for character design and animation, and he says specifically creating tangible mechas and images that burst with reality. But specifically, I think when you look at character design, you can see it starting with Xabungle, that you start getting much more 80s styled character designs. A character like Rag, you would not have seen, or Elchi, neither of them you would have seen a character that looked like that in 70s anime. And then when we get to Dunbine, it will get 80s as fuck very, very quickly. Trust me on that. It will get super 80s. But this is also where you start to see this transition to much more 80s aesthetic characters. And Kogawa Tominori's work on the show, I think, is quite influential in kind of how 80s anime characters in this space look and move. And then the fourth point is the lifting up of a younger generation of new creative voices. So Tomino, and I think this is a bigger point even with Dunbine and Elgheim, but him starting to work with lots of new people, like younger, like kind of more novice voice actors, for instance, and also animators, storyboards, all that, and kind of building up this new generation that becomes a defining generation of animators through the 80s. And then the fifth point is the aggressive promotion and interviews for the shows that Tomino does in anime magazines and mass media. That's obviously an extension of what he did in the post-Gundam world for like those movies and all that kind of stuff that we talked about on the Gundam episode as being one of the things that creates Gundam as this show that people regard as being a director-based show that has a director behind it and it's the director's vision in the way that you think about a movie. But Tomino keeps that trend up, and once you're in the 80s, you are full on in the world where you have Animage, you've got New Type, you have a whole booming business of anime-focused magazines and otaku-focused magazines that these shows are huge for, and they get all these kinds of specials and interviews and like episode breakdowns and all that kind of stuff, and they're very aggressive about how they promote these, and Xabungle is like the starting of that trend as well. So that's the kind of 5-point list that Hikawa puts down, that you can see that Xabungle is the thing that starts this, and Dunbine and Elgheim kind of reinforce this very clear kind of template for various elements that all the major mecha shows of the 80s that at least are not super robot shows are going to follow in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and is definitely something that we should keep an eye on as we go through the rest of these pre-Zeta Gundam shows as we get up to that mid-decade point. Yeah, so speaking of all that, the reception, Xabungle is a popular and well-liked show in Japan. Just, if you want an example of this, look at the sheer monstrous length of the Wikipedia page of this show, the Japanese Wikipedia page. The English Wikipedia page is very scant, but the Japanese Wikipedia page was overwhelming to go through. And again, while this show has never had a presence here in America, one thing I will point out, because this was pointed out to me by our listener Jalicock, or Jailcock, I'm not sure how you say it, on Blue Sky, for pointing these out, this is a popular reference point for shonen manga. He sent me a panel from Dr. Slump, where Arale-chan is watching Xabungle on TV. Dr. Slump would have been in Shonen Jump while Xabungle was on the air. And if you haven't seen this panel, it's absolutely delightful. The way Toriyama draws Jiron and the Xabungle is so adorable. It's such a good translation of Jiron into Toriyama's style that like now I'm imagining the like Sandland or Dragon Quest version of these characters, and I want to see that because it's awesome. And then one of the Revolutionary Army members in One Piece is named Jiron, and he does have the goggles that Jiron wears, and is a very clear reference. So this is a show that a certain generation of manga artists, and honestly, those are two different generations, very much enjoys, and I can see why, because it's awesome. And I think, I do believe that if Arale-chan was watching TV in the 80s, she would have loved Xabungle.
Yes, absolutely. And I do just love, her with, I think it's Kupo, I think is the name of the little, like, baby angel thing that she has in the show. But to them just clapping along and shouting, Xabungle, Xabungle, like all of us whenever you listen to that amazing theme song.
Oh, I mean, lest it go unsaid, Xabungle? Is that the best name for a mecha in a Tomino show? Like, it's the most fun to say. It's got the best mouthfeel to it. When you croon it in a theme song, it might be the most fun to just say the name of in a song. It's a great name. I love it.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's fantastic because it also works, I think, equally well, whether you're saying it with like an English voiced accent, Xabungle, or the Japanese voice accent, Xabunguru.
Yes.
It's real good. Yes. It's got that mouth feel. It makes you want to say it over and over again. It's fucking great.
I also love the choice that there is no X in Japanese. So like in Japanese, it's a Z sound, basically, za banguru. And then they spelled it in Romaji with the X. And so it's XA bungle. And I love that choice, because they didn't you could easily imagine them have spelled this with a Z. It's the exact same sound, but doing it with the X, there's something about that is so fun to like write down. I love it. It's a great choice.
It's a 10 out of 10 name for sure.
All right. And finally, we've got Tomino's own self-assessment of the series, because this is always funny. And this is a paragraph from the Japanese Wikipedia that has some crazy things. And so, Sean, I had you translate this.
Yes.
I'm going to read this here and then let you comment on what he's saying. So, after taking over as director from Yoshikawa, Tomino looked back, saying, from a schedule perspective, it's not a situation you could just laugh off. To be honest, at first I was resistant to it. Reacting to the serious style of Gundam and Ideon, he said, anime isn't just something you make sternly with a stiff upper lip. Isn't it okay to just play around and have fun sometimes? From that notion, he wanted to set aside his ideals and principles and use this show as an experiment in completing a show without being a perfectionist. However, he gave it a typically harsh self-assessment, saying, "If I were to score it, I'd give it something like 30 points. The story fell apart, and looking at it from the perspective of the concept, it's completely a failure of a work, truly filled to the brim with flaws." On the other hand, he also commented on its success as an experiment, saying, "The mainstream of anime should be something like Xabungle. I have arrived at that conclusion with absolute certainty." So, okay,
Yeah.
it's a 30 out of 100, but also I am completely certain that most anime should be like this. This man is a fucking lunatic and I love him.
Yeah, I love it. And as far as I can tell, because again, you had me quote this from we pulled it from the Japanese Wikipedia page, but I believe all of the actual Tomino quotes are from the Roman album of Xabungle, which would have been from 82. So this is him commenting at the time. And I love that apparently, like, he does, just give his points or his show scores on points. Because you remember in the Daitarn 3 episode, I had a quote, but that one was from like 2001 or 2002 of him looking back on Daitarn 3 and saying it was an 80 out of 100, even though when they made the Blu-ray release like 15 years later, he was like, nah, this shit sucks. So you always have to sort of navigate Tomino's statements about his own works very carefully and not take anything he says too seriously. Because, yes, there is the sense of him, looking back on it. I think a lot of what he's saying there is him thinking about the difficulties of the production, him having to, like, sort of, guide all the, like, the animators and, like, really kind of force it all the way through. And I think also some of it might be referring to stuff that we haven't seen yet, because we haven't seen the second half of the show. So I don't know, how that reflects on this statement, but also him having this conviction that the thing he was trying to do is the thing that all anime should do. That it's like, it should be this, like, we're just having fun, and this, like, the blend of the comedy and the seriousness. Like, my sense is that's kind of what he's talking about when he's saying that the mainstream of anime should be something like this, and that he's arrived at that conclusion with absolute certainty. But it is like, as with any time you're ever reading an interview with Tomino, you just have to, like, it's like walking through the fucking labyrinth. You're just like, I have no idea what is the truth? What is he saying to get, like, a reaction out of people? What is something that is just a thing he's saying on a whim, that if you asked him the same question literally 10 minutes later, he'd give you the opposite response? Like, you just can never tell with this man.
It's like going through the labyrinth and you get to the puzzle of, like, one man always tells the truth and one man always tells a lie, but it's just it's the same man. Yes. It's just Tomino, and you're not going to find out. So, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
But I do want to point out that original sentence in Japanese, I've split it up here into like 4 or 5 different sentences. The way it was written by the original person who wrote it was one fucking sentence with all of those quotes woven within them. And I think I texted you afterwards, Jonathan, that, like, whoever wrote this would make an academic blush with, like, how many clauses are in this sentence with all these nestled quotes within it. It's like, oh my God, it felt like I was back in college and, like, reading some, like, academic writing, like, fucking, oh my God, dude, use a period for once in your life. It's okay to fucking break the sentences up, please.
Yeah, because I'll just say, like, I don't read Japanese fluently the way you do, Sean, so sometimes the way I will do this, if I'm, for instance, looking at the Japanese Wikipedia, I will pull up a machine translation of that and the original Japanese, and I can compare them, and that I know enough that I can tell when, like, something is off, or I should take another look at it, that kind of thing. And this was one where I kind of looked back and forth, and I said, I just need to ask Sean, this is beyond my ken, I don't know what to do with this. And you took, like, one look at it and went, no, I understand, let me...
Yes.
Yeah. So, anyway, let's talk about the crew. We've got, of course, Tomino as our director, and this is the first show where Tomino used the kanji for his credit that he uses from now on. Not a change most of us will notice, but you pointed that out, Sean, and it is interesting.
Yes. Yeah, he changed his birth kanji for Yoshiyuki. There was initially, I think, was just 2 kanji, and then for whatever reason, he changes the kanji for Yoshiyuki, and it's a 3 kanji name, and it's what he goes by now, at least in his works. I have no idea why. I don't know if he's ever said why, but I wanted to say this is where that happened.
It does make his name easy to spot because it's a 5 kanji name, which is rare.
Yes.
because of that. So anyway, the original work credit goes to Tomino and Suzuki Yoshitake. Xabungle does have, because of the whole backstory, a different original work kind of credit. The Gensaku, which is the normal term for original work, goes to Tomino and Suzuki, instead of, as we're used to seeing, Tomino and Yatate Hajime. Yatate Hajime is still here, but he gets the credit, well, that pseudonym thing gets the credit Gennan or draft. So you could say that the original work is split between those two. I would also note that this is the rare Tomino series from this period that does not get a novelization from him. The novelization, which is 2 volumes, is instead written by Suzuki. And I would be curious to see how that kind of comes out, because I didn't really put this in the notes, but Suzuki and Tomino, I don't know if they had like a full-on falling out, but Suzuki became somewhat disillusioned with Tomino over the course of this, as writers who work with Tomino often do. And so I don't know if they fully saw eye to eye by the end of this production. I just didn't feel like I had enough good quotes to fully back that up, but it's something I noticed in reading about this.
Yeah. I also imagine that Tomino probably looked at his schedule and just said, fuck that shit. Because he's already writing multiple books. That's it's too complicated to throw all that shit in the timeline as well. But it should be noted he is writing multiple books. I think this is around the time he writes the Daitarn books. It's like, not only is he making all these movies and these fucking TV shows, he is also writing multiple novels at the same time as well, because he's a fucking madman.
Indeed. If Japan were not a country so averse to drugs, you would say he was clearly on coke through this whole period. Probably not, because we might have probably heard about that at some point, but yeah.
I don't think he needs it. He's got the natural cocaine, which is the mind of Tomino Yoshiyuki.
The character design and chief animation director is Kogawa Tomonori, as you mentioned earlier, Sean. Kogawa returns to this role from Ideon and had a limited role in the production of the series through its first 2 cours, as he was busy overseeing the Ideon films. But you had a note here about Kogawa's approach to the character design for Xabungle that was sort of 3-pronged: possibilities centered around movement, realistic expressions of thought, and character deformations which ignore the fundamentals. One of which I would imagine is the fact that Jiron Amos is effectively drawn like Mickey Mouse without the ears.
Yes.
His face is just a circle, in the way that when you're a kid and they teach you how to draw Mickey, it's just 3 circles. Jiron is just one big circle and some hair, and I love our circle boy.
Yeah, it's him and Chill, the little kid.
Yeah.
That, you're just these are 2 characters that are from a different TV show, and yet somehow they make it work. One point on the character designs I want to point out, just because it's something that was noted multiple times, just kind of offhand in both the books I've been reading on this stuff, is the interesting specific choice that if you look at the eyes for the characters in the Xabungle, they've got a very unique design, which is that they're colored very flat, but there's a single kind of white line that cuts diagonally across them, and it gives it just a very unique, interesting look. That, again, I think kind of presages some of the, characters don't look like this in other anime. They don't draw eyes quite like this, but it feels like it presages kind of where the aesthetic direction is going to move in the 80s of anime design. And it's just if you want to point out what's one of the very specific details that makes Xabungle characters look different than other anime characters, it's that. It's the way the eyes are drawn is very, very unique.
Yeah, but I just, to pause on this for a second, I love the character designs in this show. I think they're really interesting. I think they give the voice actors some really interesting stuff to work with. We'll talk about this later, but Jiron has an objectively weird voice for an anime protagonist. But it so clearly comes out of his flat circle of a face, makes him someone that you can do different things with. And everyone is, as Kogawa notes, there is so much movement. There is so much expression. The deformations are very fun. It's a great set of character designs.
Yeah, and it's a really great, sort of blend of, Wild West inspirations with, Tim Sharon, and as well, Mad Max / Road Warrior, which is also around this time. Road Warrior would have been out, I think I looked it up a while ago, it was February 1981. So it would have been before Xabungle releases, but after they started making it. But Road Warrior obviously has a huge impact on Japanese pop culture. See Fist of the North Star for evidence of this fact.
Yes.
But I have to imagine that is one of the various things they're looking at as kind of inspiration for their post-apocalyptic design. And so Rag looks like a person that comes out of the Road Warrior. But I like that it's a kind of blend of both kind of old school Western movie stuff and this kind of more at that point modern, recent, post-apocalyptic kind of Cold War nuclear fiction. It's a nice mix of different inspirations there.
Absolutely. On mechanical design, we've got Okawara Kunio, who you can very clearly see in the Xabungle itself, which is like very of a piece with his work, and I love it. And also Izubuchi Yutaka. Izubuchi was the one who was responsible for most of the like walker machines, the like guest machines that show up throughout the series. And as with Ideon, Tomino contributed rough designs for a lot of those, with Izubuchi then doing the cleanup on them. And this is another one where like this does not reach the heights of Gundam or anything, but I do really like the designs of the walker machines. I think the Xabungle itself is an absolutely delightful mecha that I very much would love to get a gunpla of. I love the use of blue. I love how personified they allow it to be without giving it like the actual dumb human face that like Super Robot shows had. It is like, it's like a comedy Gundam, and it's great.
Yeah, and it is cool that they go like, you know, this is one of the kind of, I think, influential things, that they've gone very far away from the main character having a human face design. Like the Gundam went as far as you could go, but the Gundam still has a very kind of human-like features. The Xabungle doesn't really. And then when you get the Walker Gallia in the last episode that we're covering today, that goes even further away from having that kind of human design. And then most of the Walker machines are just full-on, like, they're just machines. Like, they don't even really resemble humanoid mechs. They just have two legs.
They're more like the mechs in like Aliens or Avatar, like the James Cameron movies or something, which are later than this. But you know what I like, with the wire frames, not, and like the top of it is open. It's not like a cockpit that they're in.
Yeah, and so it's one of the things the characters comment on in the first couple of episodes is that this Bungle has like opposable hands, or like digits and stuff on its hands, or its manipulators, to use Gundam terminology. Whereas most of the walker machines just have tools. They have like a gun hand, or they just have a big claw hand, whereas the Xabungle has like a proper human style hands and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just it's one of those things we talked about with that earlier point about there's such a clear vision for not just like the mechs, but the specific style of mech that's fit in this world, that fit the concept that they all run on gasoline, which is just brilliant. And they've got like fucking, you know, these like gas guzzling engine noises that happen when they start up and all that shit. Like, it's really, really good.
Absolutely. And then for our art director, we have Ikeda Shigemi. And Ikeda had previously worked with Sunrise on the show Dioja, but this would be his first work with Tomino. And because Tomino entered the project on the later side, they only had a few face-to-face meetings before the series began, which is amazing to me because one of my number one favorite things about Xabungle is the art direction, which refers to in animation the backgrounds effectively. You can kind of think about it as like the production design of animation. And this show just has like really great imaginative background work, particularly I think the first core, which is where you're firmly in the Old West setting and kind of the spaghetti Western version of the Old West. I just love the way they do sunsets and the way they show like, you know, the massive landscapes, and when they're in the sort of hills, and you'll have all of that kind of stuff. It's a really, really cool aesthetic that this entire show has. And Ikeda is definitely a heavyweight who has done a lot of other stuff as well. In the research I was doing for this, apparently Tomino proposed the concept of Earth, but with a sea level 300 meters lower for the Senate of planet Zola, and Ikeda then created a map of the Earth based on this, and also designed plants based on the dazzling vegetation of the American West. During meetings, Tomino was very meticulous in attending to the art setting, particularly disliking depictions that looked unrealistic. So Ikeda really was focusing on sort of realistic lived-in art, which is another thing that makes the show interesting, is that while there is a lot of exaggeration in the robots and the character designs, the settings are very detailed. And apparently Ikeda, there were some parts that he was confused by Tomino's direction. My favorite apparently is that Ikeda did not understand the muddy sea setting and sometimes confused it with sort of normal ground settings. But that does make for those 3 episodes where we're in the muddy sea are like very interesting in how they're depicting this kind of, because it's the only place with a lot of water we see in this show so far, and it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, because I definitely get what he's saying there, because I think you can see it when you're watching the episodes that, like, I don't think there was anything you could really do with the technology at the time to depict what Tomino wanted to depict in terms of animated form, because it's water, but it's not really water, right? It's liquid, but it's mud. But it has to be, for most of it, part of the background layer. And there's just no way, right? You can't do like because you need to have it be animated to communicate the idea that it's liquid. And with water, a lot of times what the anime of this time will use to make water look animated in the background is just use light and like shine light through and stuff like that. And so you get that like refraction off of the surface of the water, which gives that very kind of distinctive vintage anime look there. And obviously you can't do that with the mud. And so it's like, it does have this weird, like, is it solid ground? Is it not kind of thing? But I think that almost ends up working in a weird way to the episode's benefit, because it makes it that once like the fucking Hanawan, like mud people or whatever start coming out and attacking the Iron Gear, it's like really shocking because you kind of didn't understand visually that, oh, that's like not solid ground. Like people can move through it. Is not a thing that's visually communicated to you. So when people start popping the fuck out of it, you're like, oh my God, what the hell is even happening?
Right. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. But I think the art direction in this show is generally just outstanding.
Oh, yes.
Then on music, we have Maka Ino Koji. Remember, we are in the period where Tomino is basically swapping composers with every new project. And Maka Ino already had a few prominent anime series under his belt at this point, having composed for the second Aim for the Ace anime in 1978, and most notably for The Rose of Versailles in 1979. And this is not like my favorite score we've had for a Tomino show, but it's a really good score. It fits the energy of the show, absolutely. I enjoy hearing all of the music. I don't have like all the superlatives I would have for First Gundam or Ideon, but it is a very good score.
Yeah, it's a very good score. I particularly like the track that plays with the title, the ba-ba-ba-ba, and it's like has this kind of slight menace to it as the title comes up. I'm with you that it's not as good as First Gundam or Ideon, but it's still a very, very good soundtrack.
I'm also not sure like what it would do to be that good, because like those shows are also able to pull on, I guess it could maybe bring in more like interesting like Old West instrumentation and stuff, but there isn't the same kind of like heft in the setting that I think allows those scores to go as big as they do. I think this is the right score for this kind of like more lighthearted comedic approach, and it fits the tone very well. In terms of our theme songs, we have our opening, Shippu Xabungle, or Gale Xabungle, and Kawaita Daichi, Dry Land, for the ending, both of which are composed and arranged by the composer, Maka Ino Koji, so they fit like the nature of the score really well. Our vocals are by Kushida Akira. Kushida was a major singer of tokusatsu theme songs in particular, alongside some anime, but from what I can tell, this is one of his earliest, if not his outright earliest, theme song performances. He's got that very same energy as Hironobu Kageyama, who did the Dragon Ball Z theme songs, and then he also did a lot of like the Super Sentai shows, and so it's got that kind of energy to it, and I like it a lot. And then of course our lyrics are by Rin Iyogi, which is Tomino himself, and these songs again, you get to just sing Xabungle, Xabungle, and it's very fun. And I will also note, I think the animation for the opening of this show is the best Tomino has had so far. This is a like, on the visual level, the way like the title is revealed in the rocks, all the cool poses you have the characters doing with their guns. This is a fantastic opening on the level of animation in particular.
Yeah, I love both the songs, and I'm glad you pointed out the animation for the opening, because, you just have some shots that are incredible, like the very beginning of it, as you have the music starts to swell, and the Iron Gear flies over Jiren's head as he turns to look towards the camera, and his hair starts getting blown by the wind of the Iron Gear passing over him, is just such a gorgeous shot. But then the best one by far, it's just such a striking shot, is Jiren taking out his fucking Colt 45, pointing off and kind of giving this like silhouette side view, and then the camera pulls all the way out and you see the Xabungle next to him in the same pose, and it's just like, god damn, that's a really incredible visual. And I also love the music. Like, I do think it's really cool that, you do have, while we're not doing female vocalists like we will for the next two shows, I think you do see that the musical style has started to shift, because it is more of that 80s. There's a much gruffer sound to the vocals. There's a lot of like snarl to it, which is really great. And I think Kushida Akira just has a really great sounding voice. And just the instrumentation of the song as well is fantastic. There's this really awesome descending line on, I think it's probably violins, that happens halfway through the verse. There's like Nagasarete ore, and then you get this descending line of, and when it lands, like it really vibrates on that, and it's like, if you've got a good sound setup, like you fucking shake, because there's so much resonance as the violins all descend to the same note. It's really great. Like, I just think it's a really, really, really well done theme song.
Absolutely. And then we do get an insert song in episode 25, Hey You by Mio, and same credits as those, other than the singer, of course, is Mio. This was her debut single, and she would quickly become a major anime singer throughout the 80s and 90s, and we'll be sticking with her for a while because she has an insert song in the second half of Xabungle as well, and a song in the movie, and does the openings and endings for both Aura Battler Dunbine and Heavy Metal Elgime, and we've even heard her before because she did the song Men of Destiny for 0083 Stardust Memory, which is a absolute classic Gundam song, just an absolute killer one. And yeah, when this song lands, like immediately, the thing that it reminded me of really strongly, Sean, is like Meteor in Gundam Seed. Like it has that kind of use of like a big, cool insert song that comes in a big action scene. That is not how you would... There are insert songs in Tomino before here, but they aren't used like this. This is a very modern use of the insert song, and it like made me sit up in my seat. Like that was really fucking awesome. And I know you love this song too, Sean, because you did a whole translation of the lyrics.
Yes, yeah. First, just to talk about the song a little bit before the lyrics. Like, this song is just great. I think like Mio has just such a powerful voice. It's wild because she's super young when she did this. This is her first single, but she already has that vocal style down. It's just a really great song. But then when you get the lyrics, which the official English translation, I was watching on the Blu-ray, the standard def Blu-ray set, the official English translation is actually very, very good for the lyrics, which you do not usually get for lyrics for songs because they're hard to translate. But you only get like a little bit less than the first half of the song. So I went and I found the full lyrics and I translated them. And I just want to read them out because I think they're really fantastic. And I also think you can see some of this, like, we're coming into the 80s and stylistically a lot of things are shifting. Like just the overall aesthetics of the time is shifting. And so the lyrics are written in this very casual way, like she's talking to somebody. There's this use of this Japanese word, or like just not a word really, just the syllable sa at the end of sentences, which has this very conversational kind of quality to it. But I'm just going to read out the lyrics here that I translated in English because I just think they're fantastic and set the tone and fit the world of Xabungle so well. So this is, Hey You. I want to see beyond the hazy horizon, so I forget my buddies and just run on. From the boulder to my left, I raise up my right hand to this guy who's come running, just like me. If you're out of breath, need my shoulder? Hey you, do you need my shoulder? If you've got a gun, let's give it a shot. Russian roulette would be a nice change of pace. Look, it's just a thought I had on a sunny day. I just want to forget some of the loneliness. You've stolen too much, is all you ever do. Take a break for a while, nibble on a cracker. Take a mouthful of soup, I'll heat it up. It's nice to split it between us every now and then. If you're not scared of getting hurt, hey you, if you're not scared, want to try and pretend loving each other? It's not that I'm happy, it's just to pass the time. Look, it's just a thought I had on a rainy day. I just want to forget some of the loneliness.
That's a great song.
Yes. And again, it's Tomino wrote those lyrics. That it's just so fascinating to me. Like that Tomino, for all of his stuff, his superlatives, he's just a fantastic songwriter. In terms of the lyrics. Obviously he's not writing the music. But it's like this little story that I think like fits so well of this person who just wants to see what is beyond where they are and just goes fucking running out for it. And it happens to run into somebody like them. And at first they're very like standoffish about it. And I love the line where they just use the words Russian roulette, but let's give it a shot. Russian roulette would be a nice change of pace. It's just a killer fucking line in the song. But then you get that after the solo and you get to verse 2, that shift into they've been together for a long time. And the speaker of the song just sort of like very hesitantly trying to be like, hey, like, do you want to pretend that we love each other? And this like fear of being close to somebody. I just think it's a really great piece of writing that I think speaks a lot to a lot of like the psychology of a lot of the characters in the show. Like particularly if you were to pick a character that this is representing, I think it clearly would be Rag. And her relationship with Jiron, I think is so clearly represented in what the song is doing. And this kind of emotional arc the characters go over, specifically this first half of the show that we're covering today, like that song is what that's about.
Absolutely. All right, to wrap up our notes on the crew, for scripts, there are 4 screenwriters on this, and obviously Tomino himself, obviously being a 5th, who does a lot of the dialogue. But we have Suzuki Yoshitake, himself, who obviously is the co-creator of the show, under his pen name Gobu Fuyunori, who does 9 episodes. Yoshikawa Soji, despite not directing the show, did write 11 episodes of it. And then Ito Tsunehisa does 15, and Araki Yoshihisa does another 15. Our episode directors are Suzuki Iku with 9 episodes, Kikuchi Kazuhito with 11, Kase Mitsuko with 11, Kashima Norio with 3, Sekita Osamu with 11, Fujiwara Ryoji with 2, and Takizawa Toshifumi with 3. I don't believe Tomino is credited as a director on any of these.
No.
Which is unusual, although, again, he's the kind of director where his fingers are in all of these, clearly. For storyboards, Tomino has 5 storyboard credits as Yokitani Minoru, although again it is well known that he did many more than just that. All the episode directors storyboard as well, in addition to a couple of other people who do one-offs: Kazuo Yamazaki, Takahashi Motosuke, Onoki Nobuo, Yasumura Ryo, and Yasuhiro Imagawa Yasuhiro.
Yeah, the Imagawa Yasuhiro, that name sounds super familiar. Is that the giant robo and... Yes,
I think
giant
that is,
robo. Yeah. And what was the other thing? There's something other big I think he did. But anyways, Mobile Fighter G Gundam, that's it. Yeah, he was the main director for Mobile Fighter G Gundam.
Yes, so he did 4 storyboards here. In the second half, we haven't gotten to his episodes yet. Everyone else, we've gotten to their episodes already, but he starts on episode 28 doing a couple of these. So yeah, there you go. That's our crew and everything there. We also have the whole cast to talk about. We have individual episodes and everything. But Sean, I think we can start transitioning into just reviewing the show. And I have talked a lot, so I will let you decide where to take this second half of the conversation.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show. I think maybe just start going a little bit deeper into what what stands out about the setting. You know, we went through that with the setup for it, but I do think that it's the thing that grabbed me immediately was the notion of the robots run on gasoline. I think is such a powerful central idea in this show that is, we haven't had I think direct sort of environmental messages in a very overt way, the way you will in some later Tomino works, but it is an ever-present theme in Tomino stuff is environmentalism, is the damage that people do to the earth. It just becomes it becomes bigger and bigger as you go on. In Zeta, then Turn A, it's huge. This is all that Overman King Gainer is about. This is what Brain Powered is about. This is what Reconquista NG is about, is our impact on the environment. And so having the show that's set in this planet that is totally blasted to hell, it is this absolute fucking, Mad Max style wasteland. And you have these giant ass mechs all running on gasoline, and these people running around and having this kind of nomadic lifestyle out in the wasteland with these not just gas-driven mechs, but these giant land carrier ships like the Iron Gear that also all run off of gasoline is such a fantastic central idea that I think immediately, just starts to have a lot of resonance with the imagery of the environmental destruction in the world that these people live in. As well as just giving this very unique aesthetic. I just fucking love that Jiron is there in the fucking cockpit of the Xabungle, and he's fucking kicking on the accelerator pedal, and he's jerking this fucking steering wheel around. It's such a obvious thing to do. And yet, well, I guess it's just like nobody ever did it. Well, it's because Xabungle did it, so nobody else could do it without just stealing from the show. So that's probably why no one else ever did it. But it's like, as soon as I watched it, it's like my brain lit on fire. I'm like, oh my God, that's so fucking good. And it's honestly, I think it's even better looking back on it now, because it probably feels even more fresh from our perspective. Because again, there is this additional kind of, for our frame of reference, vintage car aesthetic that goes along with it, with the leather bound seats and all this stuff, that I just think is so cool and has such a unified aesthetic that's completely different than any other mecha show. And it is such a central stroke of genius that Tomino very offhandedly mentions in that memo about like, yeah, at that point, I don't know, I just come up with the gasoline thing. I'm like, yeah, like any other show, that would have been enough. Like that, you wouldn't even need all the other, like we can get into the citizens and the innocent and the great like class metaphor that's at the center of the show as well. But just the gasoline thing alone, like, is a thing that any other show would just like could make an entire meal out of. And it's like an offhand thing that just underpins everything in the world of Xabungle.
It totally is, and I couldn't agree more. I also love that, the detail that the Xabungle, the cockpit is rarely for actually one of these shows is in its head. And so it's up there in the head, and it's got this big visor that can open, which means they can climb in and out of it. But it also means that you can see the pilot. If they do a close-up on the head, you don't have to cut into the robot to see the pilot. And so all of that stuff you're talking about, Sean, can be part of it even when we're outside of the cockpit, which is a cool detail. But like I didn't even realize until, this half of the show, we're talking about up to episode 26. And in episode 26, there was a moment that blew my mind because it tied something I'd loved about the setting together but hadn't really been conscious of, which is that at the end of episode 26, Jiron and friends blow up a second innocent dome. They're really fucking themselves here. And the administrator of this dome, Beale, flies away in a plane. And they all look and go, what the fuck is that? And I'm like, what do you mean? It's a plane. And then I go, there's no planes. There's all these ships. No one flies. And it like, obviously I noticed it because that's the show, but I guess I hadn't been that cognizant of it, that one of the really cool things Tomino does for himself here is that he limits himself. This is a show that is entirely on the planet, which it's not literally Earth, but it's an Earth-like, planet. It's this desert planet. We never leave. We never go into space. But we also never fly. So like the Xabungle can jump and it can do stuff in the air a little bit, but it never flies. The ships are all land ships. They never fly. They're like big tanks effectively going over the ground. And so that realization of like, right, flight, this is a mecha show with no flight. It is all on the ground. And I think that moment in episode 26 made me, one, very happy that we chose that as our breaking point, because I do think 26 feels like a very natural point to like have this be a conversation cut in half. But also it like very clearly signifies to you what is so special about this setting and what has been different from other shows you've watched.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I had the same moment of mind feeling blown when they're like, "What the fuck is that airplane?" Because there's the first moment where Jiron fucking completely blows up the innocent dome, where that's when they also send basically like a space shuttle up, and they're all like, what the fuck is that thing? And they have like, forget what the phrasing is, but there's some sort of like ritual, like explanation that the innocent gave to them for it, that they all buy, but they have no concept for it. But us, the viewer, know, oh, they're launching a space shuttle. And that's like one thing that's like, okay, yeah, like they don't know what the fuck a space shuttle is. They don't know how to get into space. That knowledge has not been provided to the regular people that live on this planet.
It's called The Ascension of Light, and I have a bunch of notes on that, because that scene is fucking amazing. And the whole explanation is it happens every 6 months, but they don't know why. And of course, we know there's some kind of communication with space going on, but yes.
Yeah. So you have that, which is like a thing that is extreme enough that you can kind of, it makes sense that these people would never not know what any of that means. But yes, the really small thing that there's just a regular ass airplane that Beale leaves in, and their minds are totally blown by that. It's like a fucking machine that can fly. Because it's like, yeah, because all of their things, they're called walker machines. And it's like, right, they don't have like basic airplanes. And it just really puts into perspective how controlled their life is, right? By the innocent, like how little the innocent give off, and that the only thing that they understand is what they've been given access to, and the innocent are very particular how they control that. So it's like, not only did they not know how to make an airplane, not only do they not know how airplanes work, they've never even fucking seen one before, because the Innocent are like that particular about like not exposing that information, because presumably they don't want the citizens to understand that flying through the air is a thing that machines could do. Because as the section we've watched today goes on, you see that members of the land ship crew and the not Astanagi, but basically Astanagi, the kind of mechanic on the show, that
Kotset.
he is. Yeah, Kodaset, thank you. That he's the one he's like trying to figure out how to make his own walker machines. So you get the sense that like the citizens are trying to, or the civilians are trying to figure this out. And so it's clear that the Innocent want to control as much of the information as possible, even to the point of nobody having seen a fucking airplane before. And that's a very wild moment.
It's wonderful. And this show, easily as much as Gundam, is so good at its exposition. Yeah. And which is to say there is none. It is very much in that Gundam Tomino vein of there is no formal exposition. You learn about things through action. You know, this is not a show that starts with like the narrator setting up, here are the Innocent, here are the civilians, all of that. You just start with Jiren. And from that, you meet the Sand Rats, and through the Sand Rats, you realize about kind of okay, this is kind of an Old West setting. There's a mercantilist sort of thing going on. There's all this trade, and then there are people who, like, control these areas, and that's carrying cargo, and then you learn about that, and you learn about the trade union, or what are they called? The transporters, and all of these, like, guilds, and that they set up these areas. And then there's something about okay, if I steal this thing, I have 3 days, and over time you realize that this 3-day rule is like an all-of-society, all-encompassing thing that has been given. Like, the first time you hear about that is everyone making fun of Jiren for still mourning his parents after 7 days. And it sounds psychotic, but that makes you, sit up and pay attention to this 3-day rule thing. And then through all of that, you start learning about the Innocent, but then you don't really know what they are until you visit and get to point P, and you fully see what this difference is. And it is just these 26 episodes. It is so fun to see the world gradually revealed to you in the way really only Tomino does exposition this militantly without formal exposition. And he's so good at it.
Yeah, because it really isn't until you're at to like episode 13 or 14 and you're at the Innocent Dome that like I think you have like a like solid grounding of bigger picture information about what this world is like. It's so piecemeal how he doles all this stuff out. And I think it's one thing that makes it very interesting is because it's such a particular setting, unlike Gundam, right? Like Gundam, I think, is a little bit easier to just approach because it is like our imagined future where we're out in space living on space colonies. But this is like an alien world with an alien culture, right? Like obviously it's still about us, but the setting itself is a lot less approachable because it's so kind of almost fantastical, because it's so otherworldly. It's not like a regular, it's a regular sci-fi setting now to a certain extent of like the nuclear wasteland thing, but you have to build a totally unique culture that exists in this. It's not an extension of the culture that we already understand, which is what Gundam is showing us, an extension of our world. This is a like alternate version of a world that we might live in. And so you really have no grounding, no understanding of what like the mores of this society are. So yeah, that like moment early on where Jiren is like insistent upon getting temp for revenge for his parents, and everybody's just freaked out by this guy. They're like, what the fuck is wrong with you that you haven't let this shit go? Like, what? It's like, that's fucking crazy. And everyone's like, who is this weird motherfucker? And everyone who runs into Jiren is like, what is up with this guy? And we're just like, well, he wants revenge for his parents. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that revenge is a great motive for a person, but it's a really understandable one.
His parents, just like he's living with this incredibly fresh trauma. Like, yeah, it's because you initially get the flashback, and it's all done in the Dezaki Osamu style of like these postcard shots of Timp like laughing over the fire as his parents burn. And like when you see that, the anime language that is being used, the Dezaki style language, is that this is a distant memory, right? Like you see that and you go, oh, this is a like formative thing that happened in his childhood. But you come out of that and he's like, yeah, that happened 7 days ago. And you're like, what? And the way that information is casually dropped and just melts your mind is an amazing flex on the part of this show.
Yeah, and it's so cool because the 3-day rule thing is such a crazy, it's such a weird idea, but
Yes.
it fits so well of this, like, again, the degree of control that the innocent have on these people. And I think it's a great, obviously, like this whole thing, the innocent and the civilians, it's all, obviously a very clear class metaphor, and the sense of like what the upper class or the bourgeoisie, if we want to use Marxist language, want for the proletariat is for them to, like, one way you impose control on the proletariat or the working class is by creating circumstances by which they cannot have a real future. And so they can't think about the future. They can't conceptualize the future because all they can do is think about what's right in front of them because they're living in a world of enforced scarcity. Right. And so what you want the working class to do is have to always be focused on how do I get what I need right now and how to get like the food I need and stuff like that to be able to survive and prevent them from being able to accumulate wealth. Because if they can accumulate wealth, then they can move out of that class structure, which you do not want them to be able to do. And so this 3-day rule thing, I think, is just a fantastic metaphor for that notion of the most important thing the innocent need to control these people is for them to not be able to build meaningful, like, emotional attachments that are long-term, that create, like, motivations, that create like an emotional investment towards like a future that can be better for themselves. And that's like, hey, if something is wrong, you got to fix it in 3 days. If you don't fix it in 3 days, you got to get back to your shit, man. Go get some more bluestone, go sell this stuff, whatever. Like once 3 days are up, like let it go. And that mindset and that ideology has to be so heavily enforced that it's something that it's self-policing by that class. That it is other working class people, it is other members of the proletariat that enforce it on their peers, because that's the only way that an upper class or the bourgeoisie can manage it, because the numbers are so unbalanced. And I do think it's like, it is such a great way of kind of defamiliarizing this concept for an audience, where by turning it into this 3-day rule thing, you're so alienating. It's so like, what the fuck is wrong with the people in this world, that the notion that if someone commits a crime against you or something bad happens, that if you don't get justice or whatever for it within 3 days, then you just have to let it go. That's so fucking crazy. But it is also kind of the world that we live in so many ways, is that it's like, well, you just have to let go of these things, that you're constantly living in a world where there are injustices forced upon you, and you just have to suffer it because you're a worker. And it's like, it's such a great metaphor, and Jiron is such a fantastic protagonist as this dude. He just says, fuck this shit. like I know I'm gonna, like, with, this classic Tomino righteous fury, that we got a little bit with Cosmo, but you really get it in Jiron. And I think you can see the connective tissue from here to a character like Camille, who is just so angry and so furious at the world and the contradictions and fucked up ways the world works, that he just goes at it with just an incredible passion and destroys everything in his path that gets in the way of it, and alienates all the people around him until they eventually come around to his way of thinking. It's a hell of a setting that really, you can see the benefit of Tomino's creative process, that you build this really detailed, really compelling setting, and then from that you build the characters of who are the people who live in this world that we could write a story about, because one of them has to be Jiron, the guy who doesn't want to live in the world the way that it is. And then from there is where you get the plot and the bigger picture themes as you explore those. But it's just such a great example of Tomino style storytelling.
I couldn't agree more. And it is... It's so funny with the 3-day rule and the innocent and stuff, because we don't have a full sense at the end of episode 26 of exactly who the innocent are or what they want. Like, Beale, that character, is mysterious in a way that throws a wrench in some of our understanding of what they are. But I do love this intimation that the 3-day rule is this really hard thing for everyone in this setting. They all think Jiron is crazy. But when Jiron blows up the innocent dome and they're running away, and they're like, well, if we can just survive 3 days... But that is the one crack in the armor, is that then they're like, but will the innocent listen to it? And that's like their first realization. Just knowing that they have to ask the question of like, well, this is a rule for us. Is it a rule for them? And that being a live question is such an interesting thing that we don't have any answers to that, but I'm very curious how the second half of the series deals with that, where the characters they don't have a lot of class consciousness, but they have enough to know that the innocent are different, and they're wondering if the rules exist for them. And of course, that is the beginning of any, like, revolutionary spirit, is the realization that there are different rules for different players in the universe. And I kind of like how that gets brought up here.
Yeah, and you have the character of Elchi, who is someone who wants to have this kind of, like, class mobility, to be able to move up to be like one of the innocent, and the slow realization over the course of the show as we've watched it thus far that that's not fucking possible. There is no real way for a civilian to become one of the innocent, and her, like, desire to be quote unquote cultured like them, which is this kind of very superficial thing she wants, that she sees what they are on the outside and wants to be like that, and kind of privileges the kind of cultured aesthetic that they project into the world, but doesn't see that, like, she will never be able to be a member of their class, right? And you get, like, Temp and Kid Horla, who are their kind of enforcers, that also, I think, like, want that kind of sort of class mobility, and they're just being used. I think Temp has a little bit more of a concept of that he's just being used, and I think he's kind of okay with it to a certain point, whereas, like, Kid Horla, I think, is kind of being duped by the innocent and has no notion of the degree to which he is being used and manipulated by this kind of ruling class entity. But yeah, I do love that kind of slow realization across everybody else that this innocent deal is bullshit. And because I do think that by the time we get to episode 26, that is true for most people. Like, Elchi is not, like, fully kind of internalized it, but I think she's been confronted with it enough that she kind of understands it, even if she can't confront it. But yeah, that, as you say, that notion that, like, it's rules for thee, but not for me, right? It's like, you have to follow this 3-day rule. But of course, I mean, we see that the innocent don't, because they send Temp and Kid Horla after them through, like, the whole show. That there is, there's no them forgiving the Iron Gear. And it's not even about forgiving the Iron Gear. Like, it's just like the innocent will do whatever they want with them at whatever point they want to them. And there's no 3-day rule consideration that is involved really at all.
All right, time out here for a second, Sean. It just occurred to me, we haven't talked about the Iron Gear yet, and that our main ship is this awesome, land ship that turns into the biggest fucking mech in the series. And it is a pure rule of cool thing. They should have that in mech form all the time. They would never lose a fight. It's incredibly overpowered. It's amazing. And of course, there are many episodes where they don't turn into the mech because it would just trivialize the conflict, and I'm fine with that. In the same way, people who complain about the sword moment in Pacific Rim are the biggest fucking losers on the planet, because no, she pulled out the sword when it was cool to use the sword. That's why movies are fun. It's the same thing here, but it is one of the most ridiculously cool things Tomino's ever done, the fucking Iron Gear and it turning into the giant walker machine. I love it. It's almost easy to take for granted how cool it is.
Yes, and it's obviously it's a clear influence on Macross that does the same thing with a giant spaceship.
Yes.
The land, it's so good. And I do think, like, while they don't, like, spend time trying to do exposition around why they don't just have it always as a mech and stuff, I think you can, like, pretty easily headcanon the notion of, like, that probably uses a shit ton of gas to, like,
yes.
It is probably not very efficient as a form of locomotion. So it's like, as a way to fuck people's day up, turn into the giant robot and fucking step on them. But if you're just trying to get from point A to point B, probably not the most energy efficient way of doing things. So I think you could excuse it a bit more there. But yeah, it's super fucking cool. It leads to some fantastic moments, like one of the early episodes where they turn into the giant walker version of it, and there's, like, some enemies they have to shoot, but they're in a position they can't do it because they're kind of behind a hill. And so Elchi just has them lift the fucking leg of it up, like, rest the leg on the top of the hill and turn the cannons on its foot, like, down, and just shoot from there. And it's like it's one of those great ways in which Tomino is so good at defamiliarizing our notion of these mechas as being extensions of the human body and using them in, like, bizarre ways that, like, no human would be able to move like this, but a machine could. There's just a lot of moments like that are great. And then, of course, you get the fantastic moment of them having to fight another one of them in our last batch of episodes. And again, that notion of the protagonists do not get privilege in this world. They don't get to have the best stuff, that there is other stuff that's just as good as theirs, if not better, always just around the corner. And it's one of the reasons why that sort of breaking that rule of thumb, which is one of the things of them, doing the fourth wall break of like, I mean, I know this show breaks a lot of tropes, but come on, this is starting to get ridiculous. But that breaking that rule of thumb is so essential for the setting, partially because of this whole class thing. Like, for them to be these weird underdogs that kind of know nothing about the world, and for them to have to like kind of scramble together to piece together whatever they need, they can't have the Gundam. They can't have a fucking Daitarn 3. They can't have the best thing. They can have stuff that's pretty fucking good because they kind of lucked into it, because really Carrying Cargo got it, and then Jiron kind of inherits it to a certain extent. But it's never the best thing. And I think it's one of those places where them breaking the rules to fit the show is perfect for the show. But then it also, I think, inspires all these other people that see this and go, oh, well, we don't need to have the story with the mechs always be like that. We can have the mechs just be regular machines that exist in this world, and that the main characters can be underdogs that aren't the best at everything that they ever do.
Absolutely. So do you want to go ahead and talk through some of the characters here, Sean? And
yes.
Because this will be a good setup, obviously, for everything we'll talk about next week as well, where we see the resolution to all of this. But I think we should go through and talk about all of our crew here and our cast, starting with Jiron Amos, who is an absolutely wonderful character, voiced by Otaki Shinya, who is an actor who, as far as I can tell, this must be his most high-profile lead role, because he is, if you look at his credits, much more of a character actor. He plays. Yeah. He's been in a lot of Gundam shows, but as characters who I do not remember, like Mezun Mekusu in Zeta or Arias Moma in Gundam Double Zeta. He's characters who kind of have, one-off appearances, small roles. And one of the things that immediately struck me about Jiron is that he has this big, deep, booming voice that is almost always yelling. It is a character voice. It is not an anime protagonist voice, but it works so well. There is something about his characterization, the way he is literally kind of both flatter and fuller than everyone else, because he sees the world a little more clearly. He is more emotionally just, no, this is bad, I'm going to go after this. But also he's able to come into his maturity more quickly and bring characters like Rag and Elchi along with him through that process. And I just love this dude. I think he's an amazing character design, an amazing voice, such a unique anime protagonist who is not in the mold of almost anyone else in Tomino's world so far, but you can see shades of him in Camille and in Judo and other future protagonists.
Yeah, I absolutely love Jiron. It took a second for me to kind of figure his shit out, right? Because it is bizarre, because it is both the sound of the voice, because I think you're very right, is not what I think you expect at all, but also his appearance. He just looks totally different than everybody else in this world. And it took a little bit for me to kind of get used to it, and I found it fairly jarring. But then by the time of the end of the first episode, I was totally into it, because everybody in this world finds this guy jarring. He is such a weird kind of loose screw in the world of Xabungle, who doesn't fit in, who doesn't see things the way that other people see them, and he's not fucking timid about it. He doesn't give a shit. It's okay, whatever. You guys think it's ridiculous that I want to go get revenge? Fine, fuck you. I'm gonna go get revenge. And he's constantly doing that through the first half of the show, where he just will leave the Iron Gear for episodes at a time to go off on his quest for revenge with Temp and stuff like that. And so he is this weird, almost rogue foreign element in the show, both in terms of his narrative role, but also in terms of his aesthetic design and the vocal performance, which feels very consciously directed to give this fairly strained voice. And there are a couple of other characters I think have that a little bit, like Elchi and Rag, where it feels like Tomino's directing them in a way that I think becomes a very familiar style in Tomino's kind of repertoire of directing actors, to have this very forced kind of way of speaking that is, as opposed to kind of more kind of natural, relaxed kind of overall vocal posture. They really has the actors really push their voices. And I think it works particularly well for Jiron, because he's just a guy who is 100% passion and nothing else. He's got he's not he's not the brightest bulb in the shed. He's not some fucking boy genius like an Amuro or a Camille. He's just a guy who knows what is right, and he knows what the fuck is wrong, and he is going to do something about it. And that's it. That's everything he's got. And it turns out that that's what this world needs. And it's such a great, satisfying characterization. Because then he's so passionate, and you just get so wrapped up in the emotions of the character, like when you get to the moment where he believes he gets his revenge on Temp, and he's just gone fucking crazy. And he's broken into the Innocence Dome, and he's fucking hijacked one of their little, like, hover car things, and he's just screaming his fucking, voice out, and just firing these fucking guns at Temp, thinks he gets him, and then he starts immediately crying about it while he's still in a fucking life or death battle. I mean, it's the dude so caught up in his own emotions, but it's so infectious. And I love that. Like, I think he just has the same effect on the viewer that he has on the people in this world, because it's the same for everyone else. At first, like, who the fuck is this weird almond head motherfucker walking around here yelling at everybody? And then slowly they all come around that there's something charismatic about him, and then they kind of all come around to his worldview, which is like at the end of the section that we've watched, I think is really where we arrive at, that everybody sees the world the way that Jiron does on that ship. And he's even gotten some of the bad guys wrapped up in his whole deal as well. And that he's kind of like warping the whole like mores of the society around him as people realize that the 3-day rule shit and all that is bullshit. And it's just such a cool protagonist character that is very like singular. He's so different than I think what you expect, but also than what you'd get in other shows.
And he does have a really cool arc through these first 26 episodes where he himself doesn't change much. But as you were saying, Sean, he changes a lot of the people around him. And as a result, by episode 26, he is effectively the leader of the Iron Gear. And Elchi even comments on this, where in that episode, I think it's episode 20, it's 25 or 26, she says, I'm basically not even captain anymore. Everyone's just listening to Jiron and following his lead. And so she has both this jealousy towards him while she also has this like big crush on him. But that's an interesting like inversion of a lot of other Tomino characters. There's something kind of like that with Cosmo in Ideon, where he also becomes a leader to the crew, but he's not like supplanting Bess at any point. And Jiron is not intending to supplant Elchi, but he is much more the leader of this band of ruffians than Elchi has ever been. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic heading into the second half of the series, which I'm excited to see how that goes.
Yeah, because the ties that bind these people together are so much looser than they normally are in a show like this. Because at any point they could just leave, like the classic trick in a Tomino show or almost all mecha shows is that characters are strong-armed to be in this position because it's the only thing they can do to survive. So it's like, Amuro can't realistically leave the Gundam until deep enough into the show where he now can no longer psychologically leave the Gundam. But he can't leave it in the first 10 episodes because he would just be dead immediately. It's the classic kind of Shinji problem in Neon Genesis Evangelion. The reason why Shinji has to ride the Eva is because if he does not, the whole world will end. And so it's like he is strong-armed to be in this kind of awful position. But that's just not true for these characters. They could just go their separate ways. There's no world-ending threat, at least as far as they know, and as far as we know, there hasn't introduced some sort of like big scale, like we have to stop this now. They live in a world obviously of injustice, but not one that these people are like, they're not revolutionaries trying to overthrow the whole government, at least not yet. Who knows where they will go. And so there's this very loose bonds that bind these people together, which is why, unlike other shows, they're constantly fucking running away. And you get like streaks of arcs where people are just abandoning the ship. Almost everybody does at some point. And then it ends up kind of coming back to this place because they realize it's the only place they belong and it's kind of where they want to be. And Jiron is ultimately, he's the heart of that ship. And he's like the thing that kind of gives them that sense of purpose. And so it is a really cool structure because it's so different. You just don't have that sense of pressure that these shows typically have that force these people together until they like each other. Here it's like they're reluctantly with each other. It's like those lyrics of the song Hey You. It's like they've kind of ended up together because they're all running in the same direction. And even though they can't really admit it to themselves, they've all come to love each other by the end.
Absolutely. Then we have Elchi Cargo, our nominal captain of the Iron Gear, voiced by Yoko Mari. She's someone who we haven't seen before, but we're going to continue to see in various Gundam things and Tomino things. She's a character named Musi Po in Aura Battler Dunbine, and probably the biggest thing we've seen her in is in Gundam F91. She is the captain of the ship, the Lili Edaberry. Obviously not a huge character, because Gundam F91 is a weird movie where a lot of the characters are kind of minimal, but that is a big role of hers. And you also added that she is Fumio in Food Wars, Sean.
Yes, so that's the, like, old lady who's I haven't watched, like, the whole show. I watched the first 2 seasons, but she's a pretty major supporting character. Right. So that's, like, kind of like an old lady role. And actually, her best role that we had is she's Nastasha in Mobile Fighter G Gundam, which is the sick Russian lady who is Argo's sort of like the Russian Gundam fighter's like pseudo love interest. She's got like the green hair and the military uniform on. It's a great character. One of the reasons why I remembered that is because she pops up in Mobile Fighter G Gundam, and so I had that on, in Super Robot Wars Y. So I had it on my brain.
Yes,
and I was like, oh yes, it's the same voice actress who plays Elchi. Obviously, 10 plus years later.
But yeah, Elchi is a fascinating character because she is the daughter of, and we need to talk about this, Carrying Cargo, one of the greatest Tomino names of all time, a name that it took, I think, both of us, Sean, several episodes to realize was his, God-given name, not a description of what he does, because he is a transporter. I guess he was just born Carrying Cargo, his name, and he decided my job will be to carry cargo, and my daughter will be Elchi Cargo. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it did take. I had several episodes where I thought it was a typo in the subtitles and they had accidentally capitalized the word cargo, because carrying oftentimes ended up at the beginning of a sentence because they're talking about carrying cargo. Because he's obviously not saying his own name, so they're saying stuff like, "Oh, carrying cargo is there's late to the point or whatever." I'm like, oh, they must be saying that they were late carrying the cargo to this bazaar. And they just accidentally capitalized the word cargo, and yeah, it wasn't until pretty close to him getting fucking killed I'm like, oh, his name is Carrying Cargo. That's a Tomino name if I've ever fucking heard one.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Sadly, he is only in the show for the first 6 episodes, and then he is dead, and it falls to his daughter Elchi to take command of the ship. And Elchi is a fascinating character, because I think if this were anyone else's show, at the midway point I would say she's maybe too grating for her own good, but I do trust that Tomino is going somewhere with it, and I think there's been a lot of compelling stuff with her so far. I think she's, just a very funny character, like she is an engaging comedy asset for the show, but then there is this, very serious dynamic with her where she has these dreams of living in a world of culture, which is, of course, denied to her as part of this lower class, and as we go through the show, we realize, and I think she realizes, although at episode 26 is still unwilling to vocalize it, that is a pipe dream, that she is, not only is it something that she can't attain, but that it is something that is specifically being denied to her by the people she idolizes. And if she wants that world, she's never going to get it by following the innocent. And, that combined with her sort of crush on Jiran and jealousy over Rag and all of that stuff leads her that by the midway point in the show where we're at, she is still a very unsettled character who is mostly complaining about things, but I'm very excited to see where Tomino goes with this character in the second half.
Yeah, definitely this is a character that I'm very excited to see where she goes, because I think so far I really like her a lot. She's obviously one of the major sources of the kind of comedy and the comic relief in the show, as she's desperately trying to assert herself as the boss and nobody really takes her seriously. But that is also her fundamental, issue that she's trying to deal with, is I think she has this intense desire to be an adult, right? She wants to be seen as someone who is an adult, who's taken seriously, whom they follow and listen, who has adult-style relationships, and who also lives in this kind of refined adult world of this kind of world of culture. And all of that is denied to her, some of it because it's enforced by this class structure, some of it because she is not yet that person. She hasn't gone through enough of a maturation process, right? But in her kind of mini arc, where we get the 2 kind of runaway arcs, where she runs away and the person that she kind of falls in with is El Condor, the man of El Dorado. And I just love that it's a guy named El Condor. It's one of the best names of the show. But he is this handsome, suave, like very adult male figure whom she has this big crush on and is trying to instigate some kind of romantic relationship, and he's just fucking like, he's like, no, like, I'm sorry, like, I got my own shit going on, I got my own life. Also, like, low-key, like, you're basically a kid, and this dude looks like he's in his, like, fucking 30s. And there's something about that of her, like, you know, she has this crush on Jiron, but Jiron is this very immature person in so many ways. And I think she's struggling with this desire of the life that she wants to have that she cannot get to. And like, the life that's actually, like, in front of her that she needs to try to start living. And she still has not fully kind of resolved that at the point we're at, but I think it's a really compelling and very Tomino-like character arc she has.
Absolutely. Then we have Rag Uralo, which is just a great name. But Rag is Shimazu Saiko, who we know very well as Yuri from Dirty Pair, which is probably her greatest voice role. But she's in a lot of other stuff as well. And we talked about her on the Dirty Pair episode quite a bit. And Rag is just one of the best characters on this show, the most 80s character. And I think has, through these 26 episodes, the most compelling arc so far, because she has... like, she is more settled as a character by the midway point because she has gone through her own kind of... she gets, like, the big Amuro desserts arc in this show, where she, like, runs away, realizes kind of who she is and comes back, and then sort of reintegrates herself in an interesting way. And frankly has, like, by the midway point of the show, she and Jiron are kind of in an unofficial romance, even if they're not saying it. They're, like, very, very close in a way that makes Elchi kind of jealous. And I love how she and Jiron kind of come into their maturity in parallel, but in very different ways. And she is just a blast of a character and kind of our effective, like, co-protagonist in a lot of the action, because she is the most frequent pilot of the other Xabungle.
Yeah, Rag's definitely one of my favorite parts of the show. And I think she's one of the things that makes us, you know, splitting it in the middle work really well, because she, you know, I'm sure that she has more stuff she'll do in the second half, but there's such a clear arc this first half of the show goes on, of this kind of sense of, this is one of the most hard-fought, reluctant found family stories ever. You know, like, yes. It takes like 25 episodes for them to, like, start to realize that that's what they are a found family. I think because it fits so perfectly thematically with the show, because of stuff like this 3-day rule. They're incentivized against having strong, powerful emotional connections with other people. And so Rag is so hesitant around it, and she's so cautious about this relationship with Jiron. And, you know, early on, it feels like she's desiring something that's much more like a fling, you know, that's not like, oh, we have like a serious, powerful emotional relationship, but there's maybe like a physical attraction and there's an overall partnership. And I think it feels like that's kind of what she wants, and wants him to as part of like the Sand Rats in her gang and all that kind of thing. And then slowly it just starts to become something more and more and more as the madness that is Jiron Amos in this world infects all the other people around him, and they start to break the kind of social programming they've been subjected to. And so Rag is the one I think you feel that most profoundly, because she's the one because her, like, abandoning the Iron Gear arc is much more dramatic than Elchi's, right? Elchi's whole thing with El Condor is a good little arc and, you know, is a good little story, but I don't think you ever feel this, like, real fear that Elchi's not going to come back. Whereas with, like, Rag, there is this, like, she is so resistant to returning and is so resistant to, like Jiron and everyone else is, like, actively trying to get her back, and she's, like, fighting against them, to the point where she eventually, and like, probably the most Tomino plot point in this whole show is that episode where she is on the other side. She actually joins Kid Horla to fight the Iron Gear, that she's so counter to her own, like, kind of true, genuine feelings. She's so resistant to them. She's so fearful of them that she has gone so far on the other side. She's fighting against it. It's almost, you know, we see this kind of character arc a lot in Tomino shows, like something like Rekoa in Zeta Gundam and things like that. And I thought that's just one of my favorite episodes. I want to say it's episode 23 is where, or is it 24?
22 is where she's with Horla, and then 23
okay,
she's back on the ship. But 22 is the one that ends with Jiron slapping it out of her in probably the best slap scene in the Tomino canon. It's, you know, and look, there's a lot of heavy competition. My father even never slapped me, all of that stuff. but Jiron just relentlessly hitting her over and over again. And somehow that scene is played in a way that it doesn't feel abusive. It feels like a genuine act of friendship. Says so much about Tomino as a creator and how he uses this stuff, because it's like a weirdly beautiful scene. And I know that sounds crazy, but it genuinely is.
Yeah. I mean, it's my favorite scene in the show, where there's something about, like, he's like, the drama between these people has been pushed so far. And again, I think it's I think Rag is the best example of that kind of character, or Tomino style character psychology we've talked a lot about both this season and throughout all of Weekly Suit Gundam. But that sense of, like, she is not expositing at people her motivations for everything that she's doing. She doesn't have a big soliloquy. We don't get, like, an internal monologue, right? But her whole thing of running away from the Iron Gear, her hooking up with this, like, you know, a guy, you call him in your notes a total sweetie, Akon Akog, who's...
Because he is. He's just a sweet boy who's, like, wants to dote on her. It's very cute.
Yeah, he's this very, like, well-meaning, nice young farm boy is basically what he feels like.
Yeah.
But also someone who maybe, doesn't really see the world the way it is, the way that Jiron does. Like, he's so kind of confused and is easily manipulated and ultimately killed. And then she joins up with the guy what betrayed and killed Akon Akog to go fight and try to kill her old friends. Like, that's such an extreme emotional turn that you are not given a lot of explicit, like, exposition explanation around why she does it. But it feels like we've come to know her so well as a character that internal turmoil of her fear of these relationships and this fear of the abandonment and all these things, and this thing she just doesn't understand about these things she's feeling, not just for Jiron, but for Elchi and the Iron Gear and that whole community of having a real home that's not just her, out in the sands with some of her buddies, but this real place for her. It so frightens her that she's trying to actually destroy it, and that it's such a perversion of what she should be doing that, like, it feels appropriate that Jiron's response, and it feels appropriate in this very kind of rough and tumble world, the response is not just to slap her, but then eventually just full closed fist pummeling her in the face over and over again while she stands there, and she's, like, willingly participating in it because she, like, has her fucking hands behind her back and is trying to stand strong as she's letting herself just get punched over and over by Jiron, because it is the thing she needs to do to fully break this fear she has in her over all of these things, and to fully be able to, like, to throw the old rag of who the person she was before, this person that has spent most of the show actively plotting to take over the Iron Gear, is the other thing, that she is she is so resistant to be part of this crew. She's trying to figure out a way to get one over on Elchi and to get over it. And the problem is that Elchi's so superhumanly good at throwing knives at motherfuckers that Rag just can't do it, which is something you didn't mention about Elchi, but it's a fantastic character detail that she's just she just can throw a knife like nobody's fucking business. And so Rag's constantly stymied in her.
She has basically just got that character trait from Cosmo in Ideon. Yes. She just it just goes from Cosmo straight to her. It's hilarious. Yeah.
But that, she, all of those things that she has been on, she needs to have that, like, basically that old version of herself killed violently by Jiron's fists before she can become part of a crew. And then at that point, she just, it's like a light switch, right? She's, like, so fucking engaged. She's like, no, I want to be part of this community. I want to be part of this family. Like, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to risk myself for it. I'm going to go, like, 110% on the field, coach. Like, let's fucking go for it. And it's just such a fantastic character arc, so beautifully drawn and incredibly performed by Shimazu Saiko, who's one of my favorite voice actresses. And this is a very early performance for her, but because it even predates Dirty Pair, and it's fucking so good.
It's so good. The line Jiron has in that scene with the slapping that I think ties it all together is he yells, "Don't you dare fall down," while he's hitting. He says, "If you fall, you're even more of a coward than you were today." That is one of the best Tomino lines, because it's that way that Jiron sees through the things she won't say, which is that you didn't do this out of malice, you didn't do this out of hate for us, you did this out of cowardice towards yourself, and I'm mad because I love you. And there is such... It's so weird because that is a violent scene, but it is a loving scene. And in the next episode, 23, that episode starts with Rag is their prisoner, although she's in this completely ridiculous makeshift cell that she is only in because she agrees to be in. She can get out of it very easily.
I love they have like a broom tied around one of the things horizontally to like try to keep the door shut, and if she kicks it, it just totally breaks apart.
Yes. But Jiron, like, Elchi is telling everyone to not feed her. Jiron disobeys, and he makes her a sandwich. We see him make the sandwich, and everyone, it's one of those moments where everyone kind of is in awe of Jiron because he's the one saying, like, no, I'm not playing by these stupid rules. In this case, Elchi's stupid rules. It's like, she's our friend, she deserves a sandwich. And then he goes in and there's just this really sweet scene where he gives her the sandwich, he sits down, it's a quiet scene. Jiron just wants to be close to her again. Rag is very moved, she has tears in her eyes. And it's just two people who love each other, and whether that's friendship or deeper or what, I don't think they could define it yet, but it is love. Just sitting together, and I think it's extra astonishing because it comes out of a show that is often deeply silly. But it's deeply silly in a way that never sells its characters short. And so you can have a moment like this. And I would say that scene is like one of the most intimate scenes in the Tomino canon. And it's not a sex scene or anything, but it is genuinely intimate. And it is such a clear flip side to the slapping scene, which is also intimate in a different way.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a beautiful moment, and it's just one of those places where Rag's character arc is so incredibly well drawn, as from this like weird, desert bandit girl who just kind of stumbles on Jiron and is like kind of fascinated by him, to this person that actively is trying to kill him, to this person that is now, again, like this feeling of they are truly a family at this point, which is part of what that scene I think really communicates.
But now we have to talk about the actual best character on the show, and that is Chill. Chill is my favorite. Chill is the little girl who lives on the ship with them. I think in the canon of Tomino's child characters, like the little kids who live on the ship, and of course we have lots of those, from Topo in Daitarn to Kika Cats and Let's in Gundam, to, what's his name in Ideon? The guy, he has the squirrel dude also with him. But
oh God,
you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name as well. Yeah.
But we have all these kids. I think Chill is the best. Chill is so funny. Chill gets a big laugh out of me basically anytime she shows up. She is the most criminally adorable character design. They have scenes like in episode 26, they're fixing the new iron gear, and she's on like the rope harness next to Kotoseto trying to do the repairs, but she can't do anything, so she's just like hanging out in this rope harness. And in an absolute coup of casting, Chill is voiced by someone who would become very big for this kind of cute character, because she is voiced by Tarako, which is the mono name for I forget this person's actual birth name, but Tarako is like a famous actor because she is Maruko in Chibi Maruko-chan, which is one of those forever anime that airs every week in Japan. She was Maruko in that show from 1990 all the way to her death in 2024. When she finally passed away, they had to take that show off the air for a while to get a new actor to come replace her, because it was like a big moment in anime history, and you can tell why she was perfect for that kind of part, because it is such a perfect little kid voice, and I just find Chill criminally funny and adorable and sweet. Like, through the Rag arc, she's also like an emotional cornerstone because she views Rag as like a big sister, and is so sweet with all of that. And yeah, Chill is awesome. I love Chill.
Yes, and I love that somehow Tomino has done this twice now, because we had the same thing with Zambot 3 of casting, like, who would become very quickly after this one of the most famous actors in the entire Japanese anime industry, way above the otaku shit that we talk about, because it's that kind of like actor that you look at their credits, you're like, well, they didn't do that much, and then you like scroll down and you're like, oh no, they did 5,000 episodes of this one TV show for 40 years. Okay, no, it's just a different kind of career than other people. They didn't have time to play any other fucking characters. This one character forever. And yeah, I'm with you. I love Chill. Chill is definitely the funniest character in the show. I love the multiple scenes of Jiron in a fit of desperation needing to try to get Chill to drive the fucking car. And
yes.
It's like, it's just, it never really works out. And he's like hanging off the side and Chill's screaming and freaking out and trying to hit the fucking brakes, but her legs are 2 inches long, because, that's part of that when we talk about like the sort of extreme deformed character designs for a couple of the characters. Chill is what is like probably the most, even more so than Jiron. Like Chill is like literally like a foot tall compared to everybody else. But
Chill like
great.
looks like she could be a Toriyama design in Dr. Slump. She has that like Arale-chan style dimensions to her, which is great.
Yeah, and it's an absolutely hilarious character. And then Chill has used a great effect in that whole Rag kind of a desserts arc, where Chill is the one person on the crew who's like, fuck this. Like, I love that. I love Rag, right? Like, it's clear that that Rag is either an older sister figure, or maybe an entirely like a parent figure for Chill, and that everybody else is like, well, let her fucking go. We got bigger shit to do because our ship is constantly destroyed. We're constantly, that's another great thing about the show is that they're always having to repair the Iron Gear. They're always having to repair the Xabungle. They're constantly on the back foot. Their lives, it would suck to live on this fucking ship, to be totally honest. But Chill is the one who has this, kind of like Jiren has this powerful emotional attachment that goes beyond the things that like people normally have in this setting, and is desperate to get Rag back.
One other thing I want to note about Chill is that Tadako is also the voice in episode 16 of Nichijou. She's the guest narrator who plays the plus screw. And I know that because when I put these together, Sean, I often just take the actor's name and search our Google Drive to see if we've noted them before. And I have the list of roles. And it came up in Nichijou. And I'm like, who the fuck was Tadako in Nichijou? And Nichijou, of course, had the thing where they brought in a different famous actor in every episode to do like the next episode preview. And Tadako is one of those, which I think is funny. And shows her, again, stature in Japan. Then we have another Sand Rat character, Burume, or Blume, which I love because that is one syllable off from Bulma in Dragon Ball Z. Bulma is Buruma. This is Burume, which means it's a very hard name to say in English. But this is our Furukawa Toshio character. It is just an iconic Furukawa Toshio character. This is the exact kind of role he always plays, particularly in Tomino shows. Very similar to Kai Shiden. Not as like big a character as Kai, at least so far, or some of Furukawa's other characters, but I do love him. There's just something it's like feels very, we're home when Furukawa is voicing a side character in a Tomino show. It feels very warm and cozy to me, and I love hearing him here.
Yeah, and like Blume is not the most important character in the show, but like I do feel like Furukawa Toshio and Ginga Banjo, who we'll talk about in a second, are like desperately fighting out for the best vocal performance in the show, because it's like there's just such a casual confidence to Furukawa Toshio at this point. I mean, he's played a bunch of characters like this, but the kind of smart-ass dude on the side who just makes smart-ass comments about shit. And he's so good at it. There's just a relaxed confidence. Most of the actors have this very kind of strained level to their performance, which is not a criticism. It's clearly like a stylistic thing, with Jiren, as we talked about, being that's like in the most extreme. And Blue May is the exact opposite. He's just fucking whatever, man. Let's go. Like, if this was a world where they had weed, he would be fucking smoking weed all the time. That's just who this dude is, and it's pretty great.
It is absolutely great. Our final member of the Sand Rats is Daiku, which is awkward because when you write it out in English, it's just the word dike, which sounds, wrong when I say it like that. But Daiku, who is Yamashita Keisuke, who is also one of the leads in Brave Raiden, although we haven't heard him in a Tomino show. Well, Brave Raiden is partially a Tomino show, but you know what I mean. And Daiku is like the least significant of the Sand Rats, although I do enjoy having him around because he's a big friendly guy.
Yes, yeah, he's the big friendly one. If you have Blue May's like the little jackass, and then you have the big, friendly giant kind of characters. It's a classic, comedic pair.
And then earlier, Sean, when you said the Ostonaji of this show, you meant it quite literally, because our mechanic character, Kotoseto Memuma, which is a great name, is voiced by Hiromori Shingo, who would become an absolute Tomino regular as Ostonaji through all of Zeta, Double Zeta, Char's Counterattack, and he is Bicha Oleg in Gundam Double Zeta, so he had a dual role on that show. And so we've heard a lot of Hiromori Shingo over the years, and he is a welcome presence here as well as our mechanic dude, who is always mad at Elchi because she's a terrible captain.
Well, yeah, because this is the thing I was saying earlier, where they're constantly having to repair this fucking ship, and he's just absolutely at his wit's end. It's like the most ridiculous, sort of like grumpy mechanic character, because he just truly, his life is a living hell, because he's halfway through repairing shit, and then they're like, oh, well, for this one, why don't we, while we're under attack, let's go, like, navigate into this misty canyon that the fucking Iron Gear can barely fit into and scrape it along the side of these fucking sheer rock walls. And he's just like, oh my god, what the fuck? Do you people never think about what I have to do? And it's this giant ship that's got, like, a dozen people on it. It's a very small crew, because it's like, other than the people we've talked about, you've got basically the dancing crew, and that's it. And then there's a couple of like little minor people that they hire that kind of are in the little tiny walker machines, but there's really not many people. So it's really, he has to do almost everything on the ship. And I do love his just like how fucking on his back foot he is. And you have that really great little arc in the Mud Sea section. We have that crazy episode where they like pretend to string up the princess of the Mud People, and he like pretends to be the villain or whatever, and he's very, very good at it because he's just this eternally angry man. Yeah, it's very fun.
Well, and he gets that role thanks to a Hall of Fame Tomino name character, Propopiev, who is... That's a name that you can't do justice saying it in English. Propopievu, as they say in Japanese, who is voiced by Saito Toyoharu for the first 7 episodes and then Tatsuta Naoki for the rest. But he is the leader of the dance troupe, who is like the old guy on the ship, who mostly has no role to play, but is still like a very welcome, fun presence, who they keep finding fun ways to work him into stories, most notably in the Mud Sea arc, as you just noted. But I always like when Propopiev appears, in part because I get to see that name in the subtitles and I get to hear the people say Propopiev, and it's just great.
Yes. And I love all of his like his troupe of dancing girls, and they're just like the antics as shit goes wrong on the ship, and they're constantly having to run around and deal with it. Is very fun.
So those are all our heroes on the Iron Gear, but now let's talk about the true star of the show, Ginga Banjo, who voices 3 characters here. He is Fat Man, who is mostly a silent character. So when I say he voices Fat Man, he does like some grunts and groans. But he is also Timp Sharon. But I also want to pause for a second and focus on his role as the narrator, because he is, other than Jiron, the character we probably hear most throughout the show as the narrator. And this show has one of the best narrators ever, because this narrator is a petty bitch. Yes. And my favorite example of that is... There's a character we'll talk about later named Miss Gavuletto Gabule, who is a minor villain for about 3 or 4 episodes, and her whole shtick is that everyone calls her Madame Gavulet Gabule, but I am Miss Gavulet, and she is like obsessed with that. And when she dies, in the following episode, when the narrator is doing the recap, he calls her Madame Gavulet for the entire time, because again, the narrator is a petty bitch. And I love Ginga Banjo as the narrator on this show. It is an all-time narrator performance.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the narrator is so good for the reasons you're outlining it's so characterful. He's not just like describing the events, he's commenting on it, but they're written in this like very kind of wacky, like the language that I'm assuming it's Tomino writing most of these, is him just sort of like really just giving these really wacky turns of phrase and stuff like that in terms of how he's like relating the information for the episodes. And yeah, it's fucking great. And Ginga Banjo obviously is just a voice you can always rely on, and it's fun to have it like 2 different modes of it. Here you get like this part, you get the announcer kind of like slightly more goofy upbeat sounding one, and then you get your still sometimes goofy but much more serious villainous performance with his main role in the show.
Absolutely. I forget which episode it is, and I'm trying to find it in my notes, but there's one where the narrator comes in to, like, explain something to us, and then he says, all right, well, that's it for now. I'll see you guys again on the next episode preview. Yes. And he's just, because the narrator usually is just there beginning, end, and then the next episode preview, but he has to cut in for another reason. That's great. There's the one where it's after the Mud Sea arc, where we've finished the main fights, so the next episode begins, and he's explaining, normally stuff would happen here, but we're going to skip ahead, because nothing else happened while they were on the sea, so we're going to go a few days. And just the way he explains that, it's so great. It like honestly feels like a precursor to some of the narrators you get today and stuff like Kaguya-sama, Love is War, where the narrator is just a full-on character who exists kind of outside the diegesis of the show and is really fun, and is another way this show feels like modern compared to other series we've been talking about.
Yeah, because this is also where you get the bulk of your fourth wall breaks. But I think there's just, the show balances that really well. That always feels well considered, because yeah, it is little stuff like that where it's like, well, not really much happened in the last episode. Let's just get into this.
Yes.
It's like, okay.
Yes. And of course, Ginga Banjo, on screen, his big role here is as Timp Sharon, who is very much structurally the Shar Aznable of this show, because he is your villain or your guy instigating other villains for the first core. Then he's gone for the second core, and I assume we will see him again soon. We haven't as of episode 26, but he's being used in such a similar way that I assume he'll come back. I love Timp Sharon. He is just fully the man with no name from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and A Fistful of Dollars and stuff, down to he has the same kind of what they call a cigarillo, which is halfway between a cigarette and a cigar, that Clint Eastwood would chomp on, although he literally accidentally swallows it in several episodes, which is funny. And I just love Timp Sharon. I also just really appreciate that, if you look at Ginga Banjo's other roles for Tomino so far, they've been in that Giran Zabi mold of your big kind of imposing villain. And all three of his roles on this show are not really that. And it just shows he has so much range. Obviously, Ginga Banjo is still doing big voices in shows today. He has a ton of range. But I love hearing him kind of stretch his legs here. And he threads that needle with Timp so well, where Timp has to be a genuine threat and a genuine asshole who you want to see Giron take down. But he also has to be kind of a goofball within the world of this show, and I think he threads that needle really, really well.
Yeah, and he also has to be, cool while also being lame, at the same time, because he has some of those scenes where he's working with, Big Man and the other people that he's manipulating, and, he, mysteriously appears in the corner of a room or whatever, in that very kind of Clint Eastwood way. From the spaghetti westerns, but then you also have to have those scenes where then he steps away from it, but then he trips and is half falling down the mountain and stuff like that. It's a very lived-in, real feeling character, as opposed to feeling that character's sort of inspiration, someone like the Man with No Name, is a great character for those movies, but it's not someone who feels like a person. It feels like it's a caricature. It is something that exists in the world of fiction, but you would never have anybody who's so one note, I'm just the coolest motherfucker you've ever seen, and I'm gonna fucking kill you before you even blink. And that's it. And that's my whole thing. And Clint Eastwood obviously plays that perfectly. That's what those movies ask for. But here, the nature of Timp having to also be a bit clumsy and goofy and comedic means that he feels like he's this very fully rounded guy who is a piece of shit. He's a murderous motherfucker. He's incredibly manipulative. But you can't help but see how human he is. And I love, as it goes on in that first arc, just the level of exasperation he has at this kid who's just going at him desperately with the passion to murder him. And he's just what the fuck is going on with this guy? Because Timp Sharon has murdered dozens and dozens of people in his life, and ain't nobody ever spent weeks just desperately tracking him down in a fucking blood feud. And I just love it so much. I love the ultimate conclusion he comes to for what we've seen so far is just to pretend to get killed. And he just acts like he got shot and falls to the ground, and then the audience, gets to see him get up and sneak away. And I love that he's well, the only way to deal with this, I can't fucking kill this kid because he's just a fucking monkey man. That's something we did talk about with Jared, is his main skill is he just can scamper like nobody's fucking business. He can just climb up on anything, jump around like a fucking crazy person. He's so agile. That's
the Miyazaki thing. That's Conan or Pazu or Lupin or any of those characters. Yeah.
So Timp just can't shoot this dude because he's just too good. He's just running around like a chick with his head cut off, and so ultimately he's just fuck it. I can run all the way into the middle of the Innocence Dome, which is a thing that ain't never been destroyed for fucking decades or whatever. Nobody's fucked with these people, and still this guy's coming at me. Okay, the easiest way to deal with this, fine. You got me, kid. Great. He sneaks away. It's just such a fun character. It's such a fun performance.
So really only two more recurring characters to talk about, which is Kid Horla, voiced by Futamata Issei, who hadn't had a lot of big lead roles yet, although he did a lot of the one-off character voices in First Gundam, including he is Job John in that show. In the 2000s, I noted both of these because they amused me. He is Higuchi in Death Note, one of the detectives, and he is the soba shop owner in the special Rengoku-focused episode of Kimetsu no Yaiba from the Mugen Train arc, which I thought was a funny credit to have. have. But Kid Horla, one, great name. I love that because first you hear he's Horla, and then you find out he's Kid Horla. Aw, fuck yeah. And what a dick. What a heel turn he makes. What a total fucking piece of shit. I cannot wait to see this guy get his comeuppance at some point in the second half of this show.
Yeah, to me, he's such a clear precursor for fucking Jared from Zeta Gundam.
Yes.
As just this, like, petty, mean fucking guy who thinks that he's the main character of the show. But here he literally says that, which is part of what's fun, is that, Jared clearly thinks he's the protagonist of Zeta Gundam. But we never have the show literally vocalize this to us. But yes, like Kid Horla, in a couple of instances comes up, he's like, and I'm going to be the main character now, motherfucker, as soon as I kill you. And there's just something that's so good about it. And I like where we kind of have left him off, where, he's in deeper and deeper with the innocent. And now he's kind of been exposed to the fact that the innocent are not like one, like sole, like single-minded entity, but there is internal conflict and strife within the innocent, because you've got Beale, but you have that like supervisor guy underneath him that's not sure what Beale's whole deal is and is not like cool with that. And I like where Kid Horla is, that he just is this little petty bitch that is like getting to see the cracks in the system up close. And he's just like lucky he hasn't been fucking killed yet, because he obviously sucks at what he does. Like Tim Sharon felt like a real threat who's like really good at what he was doing. Whereas a Kid Horla feels like he's kind of lucking out most of the time. But I think it's a really fun character and a good contrast where he has a very different quality to him than Temp did.
And our last recurring character, who I suspect we'll have more to say on next time because he seems like he'll continue to be a major figure, is Beale, the administrator that we meet with the Innocent, who, as you say, clearly is there are differences of opinion about what the Innocent are doing. There's this moment in episode 26 where he gets basically like Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back kind of moment, where he leans down in front of the computer and like convenes with like the hive mind of the Innocent. So there's something going on with him, but he is notable because he's voiced by Mori Katsuji, who was Kamie Uchuta, one of the main pilots in Zambot 3. He was Garma Zabi in Gundam, and we've talked about him in Dirty Pair, where he played several characters, most notably Carson D. Carson in the Dirty Pair movie.
Yeah, a name so good that Tomino wished he'd come up with it. He's like, God, that's a good, it sounds like it could be one of mine. Carson D. Carson, the American.
Yes. But yeah, and Beale also is someone who Elchi falls in love with because he is just so cultured. This is a character.
He's got to be cultured.
I know. I am excited to see more of this character because this is someone who we've really only had hinted at so far, but lots more to come. All right, and then everyone else, Sean, is kind of a one-off who shows up here and there. Do you want to go through? We're not going to go episode by episode, but I have split the episodes into 6 sort of arcs that we can quickly go through here.
Yeah, one thing I just want to shout out really quick, because it was kind of breaking my brain for a second looking at the name written out here, was Gavlet Gable. I'm like, I feel like I've seen that name a lot, but it wasn't in this show, because Tomino straight up reuses this name. We are going to meet a Gavlet Gable again in Heavy Metal Elgheim with a very different character. He's in Super Robot Wars Y, which is why I'd seen that name a lot.
Wow.
But it's also a guy, so he totally, it's crazy. I wonder if there's ever another instance of that, but it gives a totally different impression when you look at the other Gavlet Gable. You're like, it's a great name that can be used in 2 totally different ways. It's crazy.
Well, I wrote in my notes that it's a Hall of Fame Tomino name because it's one of those that, like, the mouthfeel of it is so good. Gavuletto Gabule. I had to in my notes so I could remember, because the romanization doesn't really tell you how to say it. You've got to have the katakana. So I wrote that in my notes of, like, what are they actually saying? And it is Gavuletto Gabule. And that is such a great name to say.
Yes. Yeah. A name's so good, he's like, I got to use it again.
All right, so Sean, our first block of episodes I've called the intro arc, episodes 1 through 6. Here we have Jiron Amos join the Sand Rats. He steals a Xabungle from carrying cargo, wishing to take revenge on Timp Amos. I love the sentences I get to write here. Yeah. The dastardly villain who killed his parents a whole ass week ago. In the process, Carrying's culture-loving daughter Elchi winds up helping out with the Xabungle theft. Meanwhile, Timp convinces Grocky, a rival of Carrying's, to attack cargo territory. Carrying is killed, and Elchi, Jiron, and the Sand Rats take possession of Carrying's ship, the Iron Gear, while Carrying's former right-hand man, Kid Horla, flees after Elchi rejects him.
Yeah, I think, 1, good job writing the summaries, Jonathan. They're very good.
Thank you.
2, I think it's something that fun when you're looking at the summary. It's reminding me, because it's been a while since I watched these episodes, of one thing we haven't talked about too much is the structure of the show and how well done. Like this is one place where I think it actually has a leg up on Space Runaway Ideon, where I think there are a couple of stretches in Ideon where Tomino struggles a little bit with balancing the more episodic stuff with the more serialized stuff. And this is like maybe even more refined in this regard than Gundam was, where it feels like it's a much more modern style Tomino show where you do have, obviously each episode stands on its own, but you also have like the rolling narrative where every episode rolls into the next one. And it makes it like such an enjoyable watch. And I just remember I watched, I think, the first 4 episodes in one sitting, where normally I'm pretty... For stuff we watch for this podcast, I'm usually pretty strict about I do 2 episodes a night, and I usually don't go much more than that. Maybe I'll do a third sometimes, but it's a way for me to, 1, make sure I'm keeping up with the amount we need to watch, but 2, to make sure I'm not watching too much, so that way I might end up kind of forgetting things if I'm watching 5 episodes in a row. But I got really sucked into the show right at the beginning, and just that sense of the rolling narrative where each episode stands on its own really well, has its own big action spectacle, has its own kind of like thing it's trying to contribute to the larger narrative, but it hands itself off to the next episode in such a way that you want to keep going and want to follow that kind of carrot, which is another thing that, like Mobile Suit Gundam does extremely well, particularly for several stretches where you're like, oh my God, I want to see what happens next with the crew. Like, what is Amuro going to confront next time? What happens now that Amuro's run away? You just get these moments that really compel you to keep watching. And the show just hits that style perfectly right off the bat.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Sean, because this was what inspired me to put these into blocks, is because I think it's just very clearly there in the show. It definitely feels like it is taking inspiration from what he did on Gundam, where, again, like, Temp is used very closely to Char, where like he's in the background a little, then he's in the foreground, then he's kind of using other people as a proxy, then he disappears entirely so that we can have new characters come in, and it also means that the show is kept fresh. We're never on one thing for too long, and it's that same quality Gundam had, and I think Ideon suffers because it does have stretches where we're on one thing or we're not on one thing for too long, right? Where we're either jumping around too much or not enough, and this show really has that balance down. And again, that intro arc, I agree. You could cut those 6 episodes into a movie really easily, and it would just be a very fun, like, 90-minute film experience, because it just tells a story so well that, like, so much happens in those first 6 episodes, but the way it shows everything kind of coming together and introduces us into the world and introduces the 3-day rule and all of that stuff, it is phenomenally well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our second arc, the Instigator Temp arc, is what I'm calling this, because this is kind of a blanket of a lot of things that happen under Temp's umbrella. So this is episodes 7 through 14, and in his role as an instigator for the innocent, Temp Sharon uses Miss Gavilet Gabule through episodes 7 to 10, and Big Man, episodes 11 to 13, not to be confused with Fat Man, this is Big Man, to prompt fighting with the Iron Gear, with a few direct fights with Temp himself along the way, as in episode 11. After defeating Miss Gavilet and Big Man, the Iron Gear finally arrives at the Innocent's distribution point P, where we meet the mysterious rulers of planet Zola for the first time, including Administrator Beale. Jiron fights Temp in a final battle inside the dome and seemingly kills him. In his anger, he also sets off a blast sequence that destroys point P, angering the Innocent. Now here, Sean, I think this stretch has by far the worst episode of the show, which is episode 7, the one about the Toron tribe, which is using Native American imagery in a way that I think is very ill-informed and made me fairly uncomfortable. But from that point, this is my favorite stretch of the show. I think 8 through 14, and particularly the build to everything that happens at the Innocent Dome, is such a spectacular way to close out the first core of this show. Like, the build is so good, and is why I didn't really want to split this into, like, a Miss Gavilet arc, a Big Man arc, because it all feels like it is one overall effort against Temp as the crew is trying to coalesce, and Jiron is sort of deciding whether or not he's part of it. It's a really compelling stretch of television.
Yeah, because it's just really interesting from a, Tomino show perspective, because this is where, like, Jiron is part of the crew and he's not at the same time, because there are big stretches where he's off doing his own thing, dealing with Temp, and then kind of ends up coming back around to the Iron Gear. And yeah, it's a really cool stretch. I think they do a good job of, not overusing our kind of sub-villains. I think like that pacing of like Gable is a fun character for a couple of episodes. And then past that, the whole bit with her being like, oh, I'm not old. I miss Gable. Like I think that would get really old very quick if it was overstayed its welcome, but I think it's around just enough, and they make a good enough point on it of like, she has her kind of tragic death and stuff, that she's used really well. And then Big Man is the same thing. He doesn't have as clear of a running joke, but like this kind of like decrepit old dude who's been around forever, just kind of part of the old ways of doing things, and then again meets his tragic demise, because Temp is just a real motherfucker. But the big points of this are, to me, like the two episodes where we have Jiren fighting Temp. You have the one where Jiren goes after Temp on his own. I think that's the episode 11 you marked here. And then episode 14 where they're in the dome. And that's, I think, the two best action sequences in the show so far. Also, the episode 25 has some really good stuff. But just like that sense of the multi-stage battles that involve like we're in the machines and then we're out of them, and then we have like a quick draw duel, and then we get back into the machines, but now we're in each other's machines, which just happens in episode 11. Like it's just the flexibility with which those battles occur is so cool and give it such a different feel than any of the other mecha shows that I've ever seen, where kind of the stuff we talked about earlier, where it's less about just the machines going at it and more about the two people going at it, and the machines are just a temporary extension of that idea. And that first big fight with Temp is the one where that really is the most extreme and kind of crazy version of it, because that battle, it's like the whole episode and it just goes all over the place and has so many different phases. It's fucking awesome.
It's absolutely awesome. It feels like an extension of some of the kinds of scenes you'll get in spaghetti westerns, where like there's one of these in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly where Blondie and Tuco enter this town where they're seemingly working for Angel Eyes, but they're not really. And so there's this whole like thing where Blondie has to like circumnavigate the town and get everyone out so he can shoot them and then leave and all of that stuff. It's a really good scene. And it's kind of like that, but with mobile suits. It's that kind of action scene, and it's just very, very fun. And I just also love because this is where we get the idea that the Innocent use people they call instigators to go out and just stir shit up and get people fighting, because they want... It's basically like, the Republican Party using trolls on Twitter or something, right? Of like, we need to keep people stirred up so that they don't remember that we're draining their bank accounts with our tariffs, right? It's that kind of like class critique going in here. But with someone like Temp knows he's being used, and Temp doesn't particularly care because he likes stirring shit up, and he stirs shit up real good. And I love that whole drama underlying this entire arc, until you find out the Innocent maybe played a little too close to the sun here, because they brought Jiro and Amos onto their territory and he blew up the whole fucking dome.
Yeah, and it's such a surprising moment too, because they've set up the Innocent so well as this like, the shining beacon on the hill, these totally untouchable, like, are they even humans? We don't even know. Like the first time you go into the dome and you're like, what the fuck are these people? And we still don't really know. They might be clones, like I have no idea, or they might just be regular people who happen to, live inside these domes before whatever the disaster was. We don't actually know the full explanation yet. But I love how seemingly untouchable they are, and then Jiren fucking just, in like a nuclear level explosion, just blows that whole thing up. And it's such an interesting dynamic, because at first you're like, oh my god, well I guess the Innocent aren't such a big deal, but then you just get that next level of realizing to them losing a dome doesn't actually mean anything. That whatever Jiren accomplished here is not really like advancing a cause against the Innocent in any major way, because that's then when you get the ascension of the lights and you see them sending a shuttle into space. And I think you get this intimation of the Innocent are like a much bigger thing, far beyond this like one dome manned by robot clones or whatever the fuck is going on here. There's like a whole bigger world out there that we aren't even fucking seeing yet, that at this point of our conversation, we literally have not seen yet. So I don't know like what that deal is, but I think it's a cool reveal where you think this is like a world-changing event. Jiren almost just fucking nuked these motherfuckers, and then immediately you're like, oh no, there's like a lot else going on here, and this is maybe not as big of a deal as you would have thought.
Yeah. That leads us into the Hanawan arc, which is episodes 15 to 17. Kid Horla returns, now working for the Innocent, basically in a similar role as Timp, and he drives the Iron Gear into the Mud Sea, where he manipulates the semi-aquatic Hanawan tribe into fighting by lying about leading the Hanawan to their promised land, where they'll be able to live outside the water. Jiron convinces the Hanawan of Horla's treachery, and they collectively drive off Horla before leaving the Mud Sea. I like this stretch of episodes, and I'm going to be honest, I like it mainly because there are scenes in both episodes 16 and 17 where the Xabungle gets on a surfboard and has a full-on fucking battle surfing on the ocean, and it is the coolest thing ever. When I was watching episode 16, Sean, it was a day where I had canceled my main class of the day and was instead holding open office hours in that classroom. Now, that classroom happens to be a state-of-the-art movie theater setup. And no one was coming to my office hours, so I went, fuck it, I have this on my computer, and I plugged in my computer, and I got to watch that episode on the big screen. And when Jiron gets out there on the surfboard and the Xabungle is surfing USA, oh my god, I wanted to stand up and cheer in that completely empty theater by myself. It was great.
Yeah, that shit is fucking great. You do have some absolutely incredible action moments, and this is the first of like many times, because it happens multiple times past this, like in the El Condor episodes, where the cockpit of the Xabungle just gets flooded with mud, which is like such a cool, weird, kind of gross thing, but it's one of those places where it's just something you would never see in any other fucking mecha show. I mean, that shit ain't happening to the fucking Gundam, you know? Well, it's like, you don't have to fucking pail buckets of mud out of your fucking cockpit. But, you know, I mean, they basically just got a windshield, and that's the most protection they have for this thing. Yes. Which is pretty amazing.
I also want to say, I think episode 17 is genuinely fantastic. That one has some really great writing, where the kind of drama of this arc is that you have these two Hanawan leaders. You have Genna, who is like the military leader, and then you have a character named Muna Tut, who is like their spiritual leader, who is trying to work with Jiron and company. And there's this amazing scene where Genna is going on and on about, like, women, and in his kind of the Tomino way, where people will make these gender exaggerations, and Elchi slaps him and goes, women this, women that, you don't know what you're talking. It's this amazing like self-critique from Tomino about his own dialogue style, and at one point he says like, what about Chill here is a woman, and Genna goes, children are neither women nor men. And that entire scene is such a great self-parody of like some of Tomino's like gender-based writing. I fucking love it.
Yes, yeah, him just going off and off about this fucking, like, misogynist bullshit about what women can and can't do, and she just starts slapping the shit out of him. It's amazing.
But then that transitions into this amazing dramatic beat where Jiron loses his cool. It's very much a preview of what happens with him and Rag a little bit, and he just rages at Genna, beats this guy up, but then Genna realizes through this who Jiron is, because Jiron starts describing how he will, if Genna doesn't work with them, he's going to torture Muna Tut. But Jiron can't lie. Jiron is like the most transparent person in the world, and it is so clear that he doesn't mean it. Like, Jiron is crying as he says this because it so upsets him to even suggest it, that Genna realizes, and he has this internal monologue where he realizes, oh, this man could be a hero, and so he joins up, and they have another surf battle against Horla, and it's great. But, like, I think there's just several bits of, like, scenes Tomino very clearly wrote himself that are fantastic in the same way that slapping scene with Rag later on are as well.
Yeah, and part of it is it's you know, very Xabungle, because it's all set up by this ridiculous like episode premise of like, oh, we're going to tie her up on the mast of the ship and pretend to be bad guys, and we're like fake whipping her. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Like, down, lady, gosh, and whipping at her. It's such a ridiculous premise for the episode that leads into that outburst from Jiron, because he's trying to sell the bit in some way, even though it's all been exposed at that point. And that's why he's going so extreme with it. But his like desperate, passionate need to, like, you have to understand. Again, it's that righteous, indignant fury that is very Tomino. Like, you have to understand how fucked up this world is and how fucked up you're making it. And if you just if you just could see things more clearly, like this would all be fine. And it's like Camille just shouting at people, like, if you didn't fucking come out here, I wouldn't have to fucking kill you, while he lasers people through the cockpit. It's like, why can you not see, you like twisted adults, like the way you are fucking everything up around you? And it's a really great character moment for Jiron.
Then we have back-to-back the Runaway Elchi arc, episodes 18 to 19, and the Runaway Rag arc, episodes 20 to 22. In the Runaway Elchi arc, and we've really kind of talked about these already, so briefly, jealous of Rag's relationship with Jiron, Elchi leaves the Iron Gear and tries to build a life with a total hottie named El Condor in his ruined village of El Dorado, but he dies in battle with Horla, and Elchi returns to the ship, albeit reluctantly. In the Runaway Rag arc, jealous of Elchi's relationship with Jiron, Rag leaves the Iron Gear and tries to build a life with a total sweetie named Akon Akag, but after Akon is betrayed and killed by Horla, Rag inexplicably joins with Horla for one episode out of spite, but Jiron slaps the turncoat out of her.
Yes,
I mean, what can you say? We already talked about these. Both of these arcs are great. I think the way the Elchi arc, and I'm kind of making fun with how I described these similarly, but I think the call and response of these two arcs is actually really interesting. And that you have Elchi kind of rehearse what is going to happen with Rag, but Elchi doesn't really learn anything from it. Elchi comes back, and she hasn't really changed. All the things that led her to huff and puff away from the Iron Gear are still in her. And then Rag, it happens, and we kind of expect the events to go the same way, and in broad terms they do. She falls for this guy, he dies in battle with Horla, blah, blah, blah. But Rag goes through much more of a transformative experience and comes back to the Iron Gear a different person. And I think that call and response is really interesting.
Yeah, I like how you frame that way, because it's very true that, like, Elchi, it's her, frustrated with her lot in life, but it is her lot in life. Like, I think there's never, again, we said this before, but there's never this fear that she's not going to come back. Like, it's her ship. It's her inheritance from her father. Her whole thing about wanting to be cultured. All that stuff, you need to be at the Iron Gear for that. Whereas with Rag, it's like the only thing tying her to that ship are her relationships with the people on there. And so it's a much deeper test of her place in the world and who she is, because there is no reason why she needs to be there. It's not her home unless she wants to make it her home. Whereas for Elchi, it's her home. It's, it's her inheritance. It's her father's thing. It's all that, right?
She owns it technically. No one else on the ship has any legitimate claim over it, at least until 3 days pass, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Which is part of what Rag wants to do. And if just, goddamn it, if just Elchi was a little bit worse at throwing knives at people, she would have gotten away with it too. But yeah, it's a great structure there. And I do also want to shout it again. I love El Condor. There's just like this mysterious, pseudo Hispanic badass, like how in El Dorado, you do get like this, like kind of intimations of world building of that, like in years long past, that there were like conflicts between the civilians and the innocent, because there's like a destroyed innocent dome there at these ruins, and there's some interesting intimations there, and El Condor's insistence on, like, this is my land. Like, this was my father's land. I'm going to defend this no matter what. And this idea that there are people out there in the world that are not living by the innocent's rules. Because obviously the notion that this is his and he owns it and he's going to keep it is not what the innocent want. Everybody else that we see is basically living some form of a migratory lifestyle, other than, I guess, like the Hanwan people, but they've been living under the mud sea for so long they've mutated and evolved into like a different species of human probably at this point. And so there's just something interesting about this one guy who's named El Condor, who just stands there, it is defying like the rules of the world. And you do get this great kind of weird moment at the end of that arc where it's Jiron and Elchi have this little moment on the ship together, and they look up in the sky and it's like, look, it's a condor. And then the camera pans up and there's an actual condor, like the bird, like an Andes condor flying through the air. It's pretty... I just like the use of the word condor. It's very cool throughout the whole episode.
I think that moment is very winking, because I think Jiron thinks he is being comforting, but she looks up, sees the bird, and just bursts into tears again, if my memory serves, in that scene. And so it really just kind of hurts her. There is one little moment I noted here in the last El Condor episode that I think it's not a moment where Elchi changes, but I think it is a moment that signals to us in the audience the things Elchi needs to learn. Because it's this scene where El Condor is talking about his duty to the people he lives around. And Elchi says to him, "Duty, what's that?" And El Condor has to think about it and figure out how to put this into terms she'll understand. And he says, "It's like owing someone a debt." And this scene is kind of a joke, but I also think it's a really interesting moment of characterization where, like, because this is a commentary on what everyone in the show is going through, is I think understanding, moving from an idea of commerce, of if it's, you have it for 3 days, it's yours, to an idea of duty, from an idea of being, a band of ruffians to a found family. And El Condor is way further ahead in his development as a person than all of them are. And so I think that little moment is thematically interesting.
Yes. All that stuff is fantastic. I also want to point out the other thing I remembered about one of the reasons why I love his name, El Condor, is because you desperately want to think that his name is the Condor. It's just it's just in Spanish, but that's not the case. No. His given name is just El, E-L.
Yes.
And so people generally refer to him as just El.
Yes.
And I don't know if the implication is that, that in the distant past, that his name, that it would have been the Condor just in Spanish, but they've forgotten all that. So they just think El is just someone's name. I don't know. But I do love that his name is El Condor, but it's not the Condor. It's just El Condor.
It's, in the grand Tomino tradition of what is a first name, what is a last name, we have a very literal one here. It's just his given name is El and his last name is Condor.
Yep.
Anything
lives
else
on
to say
El
about
Dorado, whatever El Dorado means to these people.
Oh, I know. I also love that El Dorado in this world is a shitty ruined village, not a amazing city of gold. It's amazing. Yeah. All right. Anything else to say about the Rag arc before we move on to our last set of episodes here?
No, I think we went in quite detail with that one. So let's talk about the final arc here.
Final arc here is the Karis arc, is what I've called it. Episodes 23 through 26, in which Horla's manipulations lead a rival transporter, Karis, to move against the Iron Gear. Now, the thing about Karis is that he is like Mario in the original Bob Hoskins Mario movie. His name is Karis, but his family has the last name Karis as well. So his brother is Gully Karis, who attacks and gets killed in episode 23, and then his dominatrix wife Greta joins the fight in episode 24, but the battle is a total loss, and Karis believes his family dead, although Greta has survived. However, she has vowed to never wear her BDSM gear again because she has been defeated. In these battles, Rag strives to prove herself to the crew again. Karis beseeches the Innocent for a new land ship in episode 25 and is given a new iron gear. Giron and company prevail in battle but lose their original ship and Giron's Xabungle in the process. They take the new iron gear, rechristening it from Greta Gully, which is what Karis had named it after his two dearly departed family members, and they just rename it the Iron Gear again, because Elchi is lazy with names, and they steal a new walker machine, the Walker Gallia, in a battle with the Innocent in episode 26, in which they destroy yet another dome.
And see an airplane for the very first time.
Yes. It really does. I know this is just a show that aired week to week, but if this had been a show that aired 2 seasons, a year apart, it's a really good season finale to it's why we were able to split this up so easily.
Yeah, it's a super clean, it's a shockingly clean split, because that's, yes. I'm sure that's not going to be the case with everything with Dunbine and Elgheim, because I know that those shows do not transition the mecha at the exact midpoint, so we'll have to, cross that bridge when we come to it, those shows where we'll split it. But it's kind of perfect here. And yeah, this arc is very fun. You do have one of the most extra characters in the show, which is Greta Karis, she shows up in her crazy dominatrix outfit, and she's, her and her husband are constantly on the phone flirting with each other. It's just really nuts. But one thing that this whole section I think is very interesting for is because it's something where it starts to feel like the rules of this world have started to kind of fall out of whack, because these people are kind of unthinkable from the beginning of the show, right? The kinds of people we're seeing with Big Man, Gable, who they all felt like people who live and believe in this world of the 3-day rule and have these limited attachments, are very superficial people. Whereas like Karis has like a deep, powerful love for his family, one that drives him in a very Jiron Amos-esque way on this quest for revenge. And I don't think it literally takes place past 3 days, but there's a part near the end of this arc where the thought occurred to me is like, has he been chasing them for more than 3 days? Like, it feels like the 3-day rule does not really matter for Karis, or would he really let go if it was past the 3-day rule? There's this sense of like the emotional attachments are so extreme. He's driven by this feeling of like revenge, even if that feeling of revenge is misplaced, because really he should be blaming Kid Horla for manipulating the soul situation of the innocent. But it's one place where I think that arc is really fascinating in the show at this point, because it feels like we have come around to this overall sensation that this world is starting to fall apart, because it's not just Jiren and crew. We're starting to see other people who are clearly living beyond the kind of like mean of what the innocent sort of desire.
Yeah. No, and there's even a really interesting moment in episode 26 where they're burying Karis, and like the crew realizes they have a respect for him in a way they haven't had for their enemies before. And they don't feel so bad that they're not going to take his ship and take all his stuff. But, they do like have this moment of realization, and it's really, really good stuff, yeah. And, man, Sean, given your reading from a couple episodes ago in Ideon about Tomino's maybe proclivities towards, strong women.
Oh, he's a masochist, for sure. I mean, there's no...
Oh, yeah. The way the Karis stuff plays it feels so autobiographical, because it's because like Greta is a dominatrix, Karis is her sub. They just openly talk about that, and he's just doting on her hand and foot. It feels like a window into Tomino's perverted, wonderful soul.
Yeah, and I do think it's a really fun, weird moment where after Greta's defeated, and you think for a bit that she's dead, because that's what her husband thinks, and then she kind of climbs out of the wreckage, and then she looks down at herself and is like, well, if I knew I was going to fucking lose, I never, ever would have dressed like this. The sense of like that she's kind of that the whole time this like crazy lady who's wearing almost nothing and is so sexually provocative to the extreme in a way that this show has not done, right? Up to this point, like it will have like a little bit of casual nudity in this old anime kind of way, but in the way that like the original Gundam does. It's like, it's not doing fan servicey type stuff. So this lady is like way out there. But I like the sense that ultimately her character arc comes to is like, but she was playing a role in that as much as anything, in the sense of like, she's actively kind of like playing up this character. And as soon as her confidence is kind of shattered because she got defeated in this battle, she's like, I can't fucking do this. I can't do like, this is just pretty embarrassing if I'm going to be totally honest. And it's only when I think I'm kind of on top of the world that I can manage to sort of like try to pull this off. But right now, I think she's like, I need to kind of find a different tack in life, because this is a lot. This is a lot I'm putting myself through.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we can talk about it more in the next episode, but I think the introduction of the Gallia is awesome. It got me very hyped, and I think that mech looks fucking fantastic.
Yeah, and I just love the whole, like, sort of intense death battle of, like, you get this... Because this is the first time this happens. It becomes a trope from this point forward of you have your kind of midpoint in the show where you can kind of throw everything at the wall and blow up some of like the stuff that you've had and reset things for the second half and get a new mecha in there and kind of refresh things. And I mean, there's a reason why so many shows copy this structure, because it's such a good tool. It feels like you kind of come to this point of culmination. You're able to sort of expunge a lot of the stuff the show has dealt with up till now, and then kind of face what comes ahead with a very different mindset. And it's very similar to like in Zeta Gundam, where you come down to Earth, you deal with all the stuff with Amuro and 4 on Earth, and then you go back up into space, and that's when Camille gets the Zeta Gundam. And there's just such a sense of catharsis by us going through that whole process and it being expressed through the mechas and all that stuff. And then obviously you get the benefit of, well, now we have a second mech that we can sell toys for and all of that. There's a commercial reason to do it, but there's a real narrative benefit to this structure. And it's cool to see, to my knowledge, and as far as my research has indicated, the first time this was ever done. And it's done so fucking perfectly. Like, it's a perfect example of how to pull it off. And that sense of of this kind of mid-show climax. And then this thing that makes episode 26 a really fun episode is you get this kind of falling off of people getting to sit around, reflect. They stand over the bodies of these people who have died and then put together the iron gear, half paint it, and you have to go figure out what do we do from here on. It's a really, really smart structure for a show that obviously Tomino and other creators are going to do things with from this point forward in the genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a 50-episode show, it's almost a requisite that you have to do something like this, because it just feels rewarding to get to the midpoint and get to have like a mini version of the kind of finale fight that you'll usually get at the end. And, you know, I don't like Gundam and Ideon are short. I know they're not that much shorter than 50 episodes, but it's short enough that like they can get away with it, and there's enough other stuff going on. Although even then, Gundam does have the big like Odessa Day fight at the middle. That stuff isn't destroyed, but certain dynamics do shift. But yeah, I think this just feels great, and definitely had me remembering stuff from like Zeta and Double Zeta and later shows in how they do it. But that wraps up the episodes we had for this week, Sean. Obviously, there's much more we can talk about with this show, and that is why we're splitting this into 2 episodes, because we'll get to talk about whatever happens next and how it all wraps up and where we go. In the next episode, we'll be talking about the rest of this series, which goes through episode 50. We're also going to mention the compilation movie, which sounds like an interesting beast of a film for some of the fun stuff it does, and I'm curious to watch. It's called Xabungle Grafitti, which I presume means it's a crossover with the classic George Lucas movie American Graffiti, but we'll talk about all of that next time.
Yes, I'm very excited to see who is going to stick a banana in the tailpipe of the Xabungle next time on Japanimation Station.
She